The truth is rarely pure and never simple. Oscar Wilde, Irish author, poet, and playwright. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. I'm your host, DL, America's most objective libertarian. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. What am I doing, folks? It's the weekend. I'm supposed to be sleeping in. I mean, not really, because I have a 6-year-old, so there's no such thing as sleeping in anymore. Like, that doesn't like, the only time I sleep in, which is rare anyway, but the only time I would be able to sleep in is if he goes on a trip with his mama. Otherwise, um, no later than 7 is he awake, and usually before that. Sometimes he's had a long day the day before, and maybe he goes to bed a little bit late, and his sleep is a little disrupted or whatever, and so he might sleep in till like 7:30, maybe. But otherwise, there's no really weekend sleeping in these days, which is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with it because, like, whatever, I got things to do. So what am I doing here? All right, let me tell you what happened yesterday on the show. I did my show. I ended it just like normal. No big deal, right? And I was looking at, I was kind of doing some of my post show cleanup, looking at things, whatever. And I saw that I was just a couple of people away on Rumble from hitting the 100 follower mark. And so I just kind of had this thought. I was like, I wonder if I could just throw it out there on social media, on X, and see if people would, just give me a couple extra follows so that I could hit that 100 mark. And I'll tell you about it in a second. And so I did that. And several people answered the call, retweeted me, said, hey, go follow this guy on Rumble. Several people did that. And I got actually a number of followers on X, which is great. That's awesome. And then my follower account went up on Rumble. So that was really cool. In fact, I'll tell you what my let me just see here. I have to go look and see what the count is now, but it did go up. Let's see. I want to go to my dashboard. Yeah, I'm at 110 followers now for my account. So that's awesome for me. Like, I know some of you big boys out there, you're like 110. I can't even remember when I had only 110. But that's cool because I'm grateful for every audience member that I get. So we got over the 110 mark. So why would I want to do that? Well, the reason is because Rumble has this Rumble Creator Program, and I wanted to get in on the Rumble Creator Program. But in order to do that, there's 3 hurdles that I have to get past. The first one is that I needed to have over 100 followers. They're like, all right, if you want to be in this program where you can make money, you have to have 100 followers. So that was, of all 3, that's the one I had the least control over. I mean, I could beg and plead and hopefully get people to, subscribe to my channel on Rumble, but I can't force you to do it. So it's like, it's the one that I had the least control over. And that's why I put it out there, because I was like, well, maybe if I just put it out there, a couple people will see it, and it worked. It was great. I'm thankful for that. The second criteria is that you have to stream. Well, let me give you this one because this is the easiest one. You have to be a Rumble Premium subscriber. So I'm gonna have to subscribe to Rumble in order to be in it. Okay, fine. And I wasn't willing to do that until I at least crossed the hurdle of 100 people, because without 100 people, I'm just spinning my wheels and spending money, and that's not going to work. So now we're there, so I can go and get the Rumble Premium. So now I can safely say 2 of the 3 criteria have been met. The next one is challenging, but within my reach, within my ability to influence. And that is I have to live stream 30 hours in 30 days in order to enroll. And then after that, I have to maintain 30 hours in 30 days. Now, what I'm not clear on is like if at any point in any 30-day period do you drop below 30 hours, is that I'm not sure how they're exactly calculating this, but I'm doing my best to identify and say, okay, what do I need? And I've used AI to help. So what I did was I went and I opened up a spreadsheet and I put down all the shows for the last 30 days and the time that it was streaming, and I put it all in a spreadsheet, and then I saved it as a CSV file because it's basically a text file, and then I uploaded it to Grok, so that's the AI. And I said, "Hey, help me analyze this." And so I asked it a bazillion questions all over the place. I was like, "All right, how many do I need to make it by the end of the month? How many do I need in any 30-day period? If I'm only streaming Monday through Friday, how many hours do I need to stream in order to ensure that I'm meeting 30 hours? All it's a whole bunch of questions because I wanted to know what am I in for here? What do I got to do? So the way the Rumble Creator Program works is that once you are eligible, you get it for the next month, right? So like if I can be eligible by the end of this month, then I would expect to qualify for May. So that's what I'm trying to do. And so that's why I'm podcasting on the weekend. And I'm doing things a little bit differently here with this particular podcast. Not too much. Number one, I'm going to start with being 7:30 a.m. So we're good there. I'm just gonna keep that time. But instead of trying to limit it to an hour, I'm going to allow it to go as long as I need. Hopefully, the maximum being 2 hours. And part of that is because it's already April 19th, and in order in the next basically 10 days, roughly, to make sure that I get that quantity of streaming out, I'm gonna have to stream Saturday and Sunday and stream a little bit longer than I would normally. So, and then once I get enrolled in the program, then I can readjust and do different things. So there's different options available to me. And right now, my goal is to hit that 30 hours. So Saturday, Sunday, you're going to get a stream. Now, come May, I'm not going to be doing a stream every Saturday and every Sunday. Like that's not going to be sustainable long term. I talked to the family and I was like, look, this is what I got to do to get into this program. I'm a little bit late. Had I started earlier, had I thought of this idea earlier in the month, it would have been easier. If I maybe thought about it last month, probably would have been a lot easier. But we are where we are. We're gonna go where we're gonna do what I need to do to get where I want to be. Yeah, I think I said all that correctly. So that's what I've got going on. That's why I'm doing the show. I expect this show to be a little bit on the longer side, and I didn't plan for it to be longer. But since I tend to be very good at just yip yapping a lot, I think I think I'll be able to make an hour and a half at least. That's what I'm aiming for. I'm aiming for about an hour and a half. So what do I want to talk about today? I want to talk about Podcastistan, and an that is this term that was I think it was coined by Konstantin Kisin. And by the way, when you search Konstantin, be careful what you click on. So like, he's a guy that is, I guess an intelligent. I don't know too much about him, but he's an intelligent guy, and he writes a lot about various topics. Right? He's basically kind of does what I do, I guess. And I typed in his name, Konstantin, and I clicked on the first one, and let me tell you, that was not the Konstantin I was looking for, nor was the imagery that I was looking for. So just be careful when you're when you're searching for things, because sometimes you get some results and you're like, well, that's not what I was looking for by a long stretch. If you follow what I'm putting down here. So anyway, and I'm going to answer questions a little bit more fluidly on the weekend. So Joe asked, he says, "Hey, rolling 30 days or a calendar month?" I think this is a rolling 30 days. That's how I'm planning it, which is very important because I only stream Monday through Friday normally. So I'm going to be treating it as a rolling 30 days, not a month. Whereas the program gets applied, it's like you can enroll in the program from month to month, but I'm gonna approach it as if they're looking at it any 30 days, a rolling 30 days. So that's how I'm approaching it, just to be on the safe side, because I don't want to get in and then get like kicked out of the program and have to fight to get back. I want to get in and stay in. So that's what we're trying to aim for. So I will aim for the least. And let me tell you, if you've not used AI for your projects or work or whatever, I encourage it if you possibly can. Like I've found so much benefit with AI, like just like in this calculation. Now I could have done that calculation. Like I said, I opened up a spreadsheet. I could have done it all. Working with time in Excel can be a pain, but it's doable. And I work in Excel kind of for a living, sort of. And so I could have done that, but it makes it so much easier to do it with AI. And what's really cool, especially with Grok, I use Grok most of the time. Occasionally, I'll use Microsoft Copilot, and then sometimes I've used ChatGPT. But one of the things that I really like about AI is that it will explain it to you. So you can ask it. You can say, "Hey, I want you to perform this calculation. Help me work this out, like I did. Here's the information you need to know. I'm looking for these answers." And it literally was like, "Okay, in order to do this, we need to first determine this. Then we need to determine this. Then we need to determine this, so on and so forth." And it lays it just breaks it all out. So it's like this really, really long conversation just to tell me how many hours I need to stream daily. So if I want the breakdown, that's really, and I find that valuable because yes, there are times where I just want the answer, right? Sometimes and I'll say like, just the result, please, and it'll give me just the result. Because sometimes I don't really care about how it got there. I know how it got there. I'm just being lazy or whatever. For whatever reason, I'm not interested in the process on how we got to that answer. But sometimes I am because I want to. I like this one. I wanted to kind of double check and feel more confident that that it did things right, because AI doesn't always get things right. So double check your work if you use it, but I highly encourage using it. Okay, so we're going to talk about Podcastistan, which is where I live. You can see I'm in Podcastistan right now. What is Podcastistan? So Constantine Kissen, tongue twister there. He wrote this article, and this article was after you might call it the infamous Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray debate. I'm not going to I'm not going to try to argue the details of the debate. Okay. What I want to do is I want to talk about this misunderstanding of podcast and the podcast world, who we are, what we're doing, who our audience is. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding and I'm going to call them the intelligentsia. Okay. So we're going to break it up. We're going to say the intelligentsia are these are the people that maybe they have formal education. They have formal debates, like Oxford style debates. They are the ones that um, they will peer review, like they'll write something and they'll submit it for a formal peer review. There's a very specific process it's expected to be followed. There are various norms that are involved in this class, if you will. And I don't mean this class is in like the same context of class struggle. I just mean like a grouping of people. So you have the intelligentsia, and then you have, let's just, there's not really good words to describe everything. So what I'm going to do, for the sake of making it super simple, but being able to delineate who I'm speaking about, let's just say there's the intelligentsia and then there's the experts. Okay. And we're going to use experts loosely. So if anybody comes back and they're like, "Dude, that's not what I'm using it loosely because I'm not trying to complicate things by creating new terms. I don't want to do that. I just want to categorize people and I want to describe them in a certain way." So for the purposes of this episode, an expert is just somebody that is very knowledgeable about a given topic and they express those ideas on a regular basis. That's it. That's simple. Okay. The experts could be wrong. They could be they could be wildly wrong, right? Expert in this particular context doesn't mean they're always right. Doesn't mean they're mostly right. It just means they have a lot of knowledge. They can sit down, you can about a particular topic, and they can talk for hours about it. They understand a lot of the terminology within that realm, right? So if you're saying, like, if somebody were to say, like, what, maybe you're a software developer and you're an expert. Okay, that means that you can sit down and you can talk about software development all over the place, not just writing code, but some of the processes that companies use, right? Like some of the tools that they use, some of the terminology that's commonplace when you're writing programs, some of the concepts and ideas. You could talk about all of that stuff. You understand the terms. You can debate different elements of that, right? It doesn't necessarily make you a good programmer per se. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should be writing books for students per se. It just means you understand all of those things. And then you can have a very healthy and long conversation, because there are conversations for which I do not engage in, because the length of time that I could talk about them is very little. So I don't think that, like, you could argue and say there's intelligentsia, there are experts, and you could say there are people that are fairly knowledgeable, and then there are people that are hobbyist, right? We could probably break it down something along those lines so that we cover everybody that's talking, because the way the internet works, everybody wants to have a voice. Not everybody should have a voice. Well, I shouldn't say it that way. Not everybody should express their voice on every topic, because some people need to know the limits of what they can talk about, right? And I think that's fair. Now we're going to get into that. So Douglas Murray and Dave Smith, they got on the Joe Rogan podcast, and they basically were there to discuss, and I'll show you the clip. They were there to discuss the issue in the Middle East primarily, and then just basically see where they align, see where they don't align, and have a conversation. And after that, the internet practically blew up for like a day and a half. My feed was nothing but clips and comments, quotes, whatever, on that podcast episode. Like I like that. I was like scrolling. I'm like, all right. I actually even put in a filter. I was like, all right, I'm gonna filter some of these words so that I can see if there's anything else going on in the world. And it turns out there was. But that's how this one got pretty big. And I don't know the context of whether or not it was the biggest show that Joe has ever had, but I assume that that particular episode got many more views than typical. So it blew up, and the premise that I don't want to say the premise, the reason it blew up in the initial conversation was all about the first roughly 45 minutes of the exchange between Dave and Douglas. They basically went back and forth over experts who should talk, blah, 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 blah. And we're going to get into that. I got a little clip for that. But let's now that I've kind of set the stage, let's get into what Konstantin said, because after that debate, and then after all the debate online, and basically it went the way you might expect. Anybody who was a diehard Dave fan, they stuck with Dave. Anybody who was a diehard Douglas fan, they stuck with Douglas. That's pretty much how it went. Just kind of divided on lines of team. And there wasn't really too much objective uh, uh, conversation about it. Like, you didn't see too many people that were like, I'm a big fan of Dave. Here's why I think he got it wrong. Same thing for Douglas. You didn't see that. You didn't see too many people who, favored one side or the other, but were talking objectively about this issue, right? So like it just basically divided people. I'm going to try to make it more objective, but today I'm actually going to focus on this issue of Podcastistan, what it means, and what people are missing. So let's go to his article here. It says Murray versus Smith dispatches from Podcastistan. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's a lengthy article. The link is in the show notes. You have to have a subscription to read, I think, the entirety of it. So I'm only going to address a few points within it so that so that we can kind of understand like this whole Podcastistan, what it means and why I think people are missing something. So he starts off by saying, "Prepare for the unprecedented. I'm about to admit I was wrong." Now on the internet, that's a big deal. Like virtually nobody admits that they're wrong. And usually because the internet has a particular vibe. And that vibe is people gravitate to somebody that's based, right? Based means one of two things, or not one of two things, but means it's a two-part meaning. It basically means what you said was pretty awesome, like the way that you said it, but also the point that you made, which means it kind of requires some level of veracity, some level of truth. Now people have a different view of what is and is not truth, but that's basically the idea of being based, right? And so we talk about like audience capture. I don't know if that's really a good term, but the idea being that like people deliver content based on what their audience wants to see, not what, is objective and what they really believe necessarily. There is some of that, but I think if you want to boil it down to the most simple thing, which I like doing, I like making things simple. You can just think of it in terms of um, people are trying to be based. Right? They wanna say something. They wanna say something that's, relatively intelligent, and they wanna say it in an interesting way. And some people are good at it, and some people maybe not so much. Yeah, he was wrong, and that's fair. Not too much happened, so kudos to him. For years, I've celebrated the rise of new media and its impact on our ability to seek truth, challenge false narratives peddled by legacy institutions, and transform the way we conduct our public debate. The rationale behind my thought process seems solid. After all, quote, the medium is the message, end quote. The reason I thought our conversation about politics, culture, and entertainment had become so fake was the rapidly shrinking soundbite and media elite more interested in winning than learning. Journalism, academia, and politics merged into a monoculture whose consensus rested primarily on the vigorous inhalation of gases emanating from their own backsides onto which they had firmly inserted their heads. Nice way of saying people had their head stuck up their ass. I don't know anyone who voted for Trump, was their mantra. Far from being a confession of ignorance and a lack of perspective, this phrase was uttered with pride at dinner parties to signal membership of the elite class. Now, that's funny that he mentions that because I think in this whole debate on Podcastistan, there is this certain level of pride and way that people signal their membership to the group that they're in, whether you believe you're in the intelligentsia group or the expert group or the hobbyist group, whatever. Like, I think there are ways that people signal that. I think that actually exists throughout human interaction. So let's see. Far from the response from this contingent to the sequential dismantling of their core assumptions about the way the world works was an attempt to use credentialism to make reality go away. Experts think vaccinating newborns against COVID is essential. Now pipe down, mask up, and follow the science. So he's kind of, alluding back to COVID. All right. So let's go. Let's skip on here. So I just wanted to read that kind of beginning to kind of lay the foundation here. So he's suggesting like this, there's this idea like the internet, podcasts, bloggers, citizen journalists, they're going to radically change things for the better because the elite class has gotten too smug. And rather than reporting truth and seeking truth, even if it contradicts their own narrative and worldview, they're instead now seeking out to basically say it's basically a power thing. Like now we have the power, we're going to exert it. And let me tell you something. He's not wrong, and it's not the first time this has happened. So let me scroll back. Like, it's not physically scroll back, but let's go way back for a moment. And I want you to think about this man. Um, Long hair and walked around talking about the law, criticizing how things were done socially, legally, and getting in trouble with the intelligentsia of his day. Sound like anybody you know? If you said Jesus, Bing, you're right. That's who I'm talking about. Now, let me let me state, I'm not saying that everybody that does that today is Jesus. All I'm saying is in Jesus's time, what Jesus did was push back against the intelligentsia of the day. So you might consider him to be like the expert, or you might even say he was a little bit lower than an expert, depending on your perspective, right? But he was not part of the intelligentsia class, and it made the Pharisees and the Sadducees very angry. And you can read in Scripture where like they went and did something, and it would say he knew they were trying to trick him, like they were trying to dunk on Jesus. Like it's written in language that's not how we use today. We don't back then they didn't say, man, they were trying to dunk on Jesus. Today we would say that. That's exactly what they were doing, right? So this idea is not new. Okay. So let's go on here. Curious, open minded, inquisitive podcasters, unrestrained by the need to comply with corporate media message, discipline, and social media censorship, were finally able to speak freely, seek the truth, and debate controversial ideas in good faith in front of grateful audiences of millions. Okay. I think he's got that wrong right off the bat. I would say curious, open minded, inquisitive podcasters, unrestrained by the need to comply with corporate media message, discipline, and social media censorship, were finally able to speak freely. End it right there. You could add in discuss controversial ideas. I don't know that everybody was necessarily in good faith, nor do I know that all the audiences were necessarily grateful. There's what's that term? Hate followers. Like there's a lot of people that follow somebody just so they can continually criticize them, right? So I don't think that the audiences were all necessarily grateful. What I think is people, like he said, got tired of the intelligentsia, and we'll see here in a minute. A lot of people point to COVID as kind of like the camel that broke the straw's back. People got tired of it, and there was a rise because of technology that allowed everybody to grab a microphone and have a conversation, right? Like, and just talk about whatever they want to talk about. So now everybody has a voice, but this is not a new thing. Everybody's always wanted a voice, right? This is why Jesus was so popular, because the people didn't feel like they had a voice and he was their voice, right? Now, in that particular case, if you're a religious person, you believe that everything was for a much, much higher purpose than you would today with just podcast. So again, I'm not comparing people to Jesus on a spiritual level. I'm just saying the experience that he had is similar to experiences that we've seen with other people. The Gutenberg press, it revolutionized information and it upset, like the Catholic Church started losing some of their power because they had centralized power because they could control information. And the reason that they could control information, because prior to the Gutenberg press, it was very costly, expensive, and time consuming to print, if you will, documents. They had to be handwritten or however, right? Like you just didn't have something you just pump out. It's not like you had a printer today and you could just boom, 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 and make 40 copies in a minute. Like you didn't have that. It took a long time. So only the people that had the resources to afford that were able to necessarily have as much information as they wanted. Whereas people that were poorer, they had less information. So they had to rely on people to communicate that information to them. They many of them couldn't read. Many of them, couldn't go and research and look up what somebody had said and say, hey, that's not true. Like none of that existed. Okay. So I think he's kind of already starting off on the wrong foot here because he's making assumptions about the podcast world that are not always true. And we know they're not always true. We know there are bad podcasters out there. Like, for instance, if you want to take Destiny, for example, Destiny's a podcaster. He's been a podcaster for a long time. And a lot of people in the podcast community don't have respect for him. We think that he is very misleading. We believe that he speaks the way that he kind of wins arguments is to speak loudly and extremely fast over people and be very snarky. But and when he has been clowned upon, which is a term for the intelligentsia to mean when he has been criticized in a way that makes people laugh, we have kind of celebrated it because we look at him, we're like, dude, you're terrible. You're you, despite your popularity, are at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to delivering quality information. Like that's how we see it in our community. Now, not everybody. There are people that are like, dude, he's just brilliant, right? So it's a mix. So I don't think it's appropriate for Constantine to start off the gate and kind of make this a broad brush assumption about the podcast world because there is a lot of variability in the podcast world, and we know this. Every podcaster will admit it. There's not a podcaster out there that has been doing this longer than like 5 days that wouldn't say, "Oh yeah, there are some really bad podcasts out there. There are some that their quality is terrible, just the quality of production. There are some that when they speak, they're terrible speakers, right? Then there are also some that the information they put out is garbage. Their logic is terrible, and nobody should listen to them. Not that we're trying to say that they should be censored. Just if you're going to spend your time is better off over here, not over here. That's where we are. So we acknowledge all of this already. We know there's a variability. We know that there's a variety of good and bad that cover all sorts of reasons. Production, delivery, information. We already know that. So go back to his article here. Let's see here. Where are we? Then he goes, so far, so wonderful. After all, what could go wrong with democratizing information? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot. So again, this seems to be a new revelation to him. This isn't a new revelation to us. And how can I prove this? Okay. In the podcast world, it's very common to do response videos. So find anybody that's doing podcasts for a while and they have made a response video to somebody that's criticizing them. This is part of the culture here. So like one of my more favorite podcast, more of a streamer, I guess, not really a podcaster, but streamer, um, Chew on Head. She recently, I don't know, it was like a month ago, she put out a response video of people that were criticizing her. And she played clips, I think, in full enough context so that we weren't deliberately pulling them out of context to make them look worse. And it was like very clear these people didn't understand what they were watching when they criticized her, right? They didn't understand. And their arguments were so bad, right? And some of them have been around a while. Some of them were known people. We know this. We've been doing this for a while now. And I think it's funny because I think in that episode she said, "It's been a long time since I've done a response video." So she said something to the effect of, "We're going to do an old-fashioned response video, like the good old days," something like that. Like this has been a thing for a long time. The intelligentsia, they seem to be just now catching up to the world of podcast and to the norms and the culture that exist within it. And I think what I hope to prove and show you and demonstrate through this episode is that they came into this culture trying to impose their own, and they got laughed at, right? Like that's what I hope to prove to you. So he says, turns out quite a lot. So skim on down here. He said, I am merely pointing out that the incentive structures and thought patterns we would typically associate with the entertainment business are not the same as those we would expect to see in journalism or academia. So again, there's this kind of like dichotomy there. It's like, okay, entertainment or journalism and academia, right? So, and it's like, no, the podcast world is a blend of both. And so sometimes it'll be very entertaining. Sometimes maybe not so much. I am not very entertaining. Like I don't tell many jokes. You know, the way I deliver is not typically very funny. It's a relatively serious show. I'm showing you lots of information to the best of my ability. I cite all my sources. So I wouldn't call myself entertaining. Like when I used to listen to like Glenn Beck like 20 years ago, I thought that was entertaining. They were funny. They did skits. They did jokes, and they were good at it, and it made you laugh. I don't really make people laugh so much. So I'm not really entertainment. And I think that if I'm in the middle, I lean more toward information, quality of information than quality of entertainment. But he seems to have this idea that it's one or the other, right? As opposed to a third in the middle, which as a libertarian, trust me, I understand that very well. People tend to think that you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, and there's no such thing as being in the middle. And I'm like, and I'm not really in the middle per se, but I'm in between in a sense because there are some areas for Republicans for which I agree, some areas for Democrats which I agree. But I am not fully one or the other. I am entirely a different entity, right? And I think in the podcast world, it's the same. It's not entirely, it's not entirely entertainment, and it's not entirely, we can say, academic or informational, right? Sometimes it's a blend, and it varies. It's on a spectrum, and you're going to see some people. Some people are going to be very entertaining, and their information is garbage. Some information is going to be awesome, and they're kind of dry. That's how it works. So he goes on, and I didn't like this. I just pointed out because I find it kind of annoying. One of the big problems, and we'll get into this, is that people from the intelligentsia world seem to be incapable of accurately describing their opponents. And this is actually something very common on the internet. It drives me bananas. Like people would just, so like here, he labels Smith, he says Smith being in the so-called anti-war camp. No, no, there's no so-called anti-war camp. Dave Smith is anti-war, period. He is in the anti-war camp. He represents the anti-war camp very well. There are no scare quotes necessary. He is anti-war. He is in that camp. Nobody who is anti-war would say Dave Smith is not anti-war. They might disagree with some perspectives that he has and whatnot, and there are libertarians that are also anti-war that have their disagreements with him, and that's fine. But they would be foolish to say, yeah, Dave's not anti-war. No, he is, and he's in this camp. Period. And so this is part of the problem. Part of the problem is that intelligentsia gets to say whatever they want, and the only people that get to correct them are other intelligentsia if they care to. And I'm telling you, he's already got some things wrong because he doesn't understand, and this is the case with most of them. They don't understand the podcast world, why it rose up, why it's popular. They don't understand any of that. So let's go on here. Again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. So he says, thanks to the woke left's misuse of the word Nazi for the last decade, in Podcastistan, the term is not a descriptive label, but a vague, meaningless insult used to cancel people. He is correct here. He is. Part of the reason that Podcastistan popped up, part of the reason that it became popular is because the masses were being beat up by the intelligentsia. Let's just say many of the masses are right wingers. They were getting beat up by the left wing intelligentsia, and the right wing intelligentsia was not doing such a good job of combating it. This is the reason why podcasts became popular, and not the reason, but they also became popular because as human history tends to do, it just simply became cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for everybody to have voice. Once upon a time, we were all on MySpace, right? Remember MySpace? We were all there. Maybe not all of us, but a lot of us were there. And it was very limited. And then you got Facebook, and then you got Twitter, then you have TikTok, and all these new mediums popped up. And they allowed people to have a voice in different ways. And then eventually we got to a point where the equipment started becoming cheaper and cheaper, right? Like the setup that I have, I've got a relatively nice camera. I've got a nice mic. I've got this mixer here. I've spent several $1,000s on it. But once upon a time, I would have had to have spent tens of thousands of dollars. So it was well out of even my reach. And I'm doing fairly well. So it became cheaper even for people that were not necessarily poor, but people that We're not necessarily rich either. But even if you don't have a lot of money, if you're limited means, you can still have a podcast. You can go and sign up for free and you could find a, a $50, $70 mic, and you can work a little harder to make it sound good, right? There are different ways that you can do this. So even for only a couple of, a few $100s, you can become a podcaster. So one of the reasons that it became popular is because it became cheaper and it gave people another opportunity to have a voice. Because I think history has shown very clearly people like having a voice. So when we get to this term like Nazi, things are different here in Podcastistan, right? The word Nazi, we don't use it because it's cliche. We've moved on from that. It doesn't mean anything anymore because, like you said, it's a vague, meaningless insult. And it was really used to cancel people. Oh, you're a Nazi? I'm going to videotape you and put it all over the internet and hopefully get you fired. That's not what we like to do in Podcastistan. Like some people do, but a lot of us consider that very poor form. So, um, I think he's kind of correct in this sense. Like the term Nazi and other terms like it, racism, you know, white privilege, all these terms, they've become diluted because they got overused. They became vague and ended up being just a way to get people to shut up. Well, people don't want to be shut up. They want to have a voice. This is one of the reasons why social media in general is so popular. It gives people a voice and a voice all over the place. When I go to Facebook, I watch reels, and you've probably done this too. I love watching. Uh, there are various couples out there that do comedy and they make jokes. Like there's a one I don't remember their names, all of them exactly, but there's one couple. She makes jokes, very dirty jokes to her husband. So she'll have her phone there, phone on her, and then her husband's behind her, and she's like, hey, I can't remember his name. She's like, hey, so and so, blah blah blah. And she'll tell him like it's almost like a one liner joke. And then the punchline is usually very dirty. And he's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you just said that." Right? Like that's their thing. They just make married couple humor. There's another couple. What's his name? I can see his face. I can see all their faces. I'm trying to remember any of their names. And I'm drawing a blank at the time. Him and his wife are Christian, and he does a lot of marriage tips. Right? He'll say, expert marriage tip, and it's always something a little on the funny side, like expert marriage tip, blah blah blah. To get like I think one time he sprayed his wife with a bottle of water. He was like, if your wife is, you know, uh, he goes, if your wife is arguing with you, the way to get her to be quiet is to spray her with a bottle of water. It'll throw her off and she'll be quiet. And then she starts going, what, blah, blah, blah. And he sprays her. And she's like, I can't believe you did that. And he sprayed her again. And she walks off. Now I think it's scripted, but the idea being they're just having fun. And in his particular case, they're having good, clean fun. And then there's another couple. And I do remember her name. She goes by Katie McCabe, and her husband, they do a serious bunch of reels and videos. And theirs is to improve the quality of relationships. And so they talk about like, okay, if you're a woman, here are some things that you shouldn't be doing because it's gonna, harm your relationship. It's not gonna help your relationship. And then they do the same thing for men. They're like, all right, men, here's what what you're missing. And they'll do skits and they'll talk about it and stuff like that. So there are plenty of reasons for which people get on there and have a voice. Sometimes it's humor. Sometimes it's to communicate, hey, we would like to improve marriages, one video at a time. Other people like me are like, look, I want to talk about social and political topics of the day. People like Dave are very big on anti-war foreign policy. So he talks about that a lot. People like Joe Rogan are like, I just want to have interesting conversations with people. So the world of podcast is a variety. Okay. It is all over the place. So let's get back to our document here. So indeed, one of the main areas of misunderstanding in the discussion is the role of expertise. He doesn't claim to be an expert, is Smith's riposte to Murray's suggestion that Cooper doesn't know what he's talking about. He uses the same defense that Murray questions Smith's own willingness to opine on geopolitics. Smith and his supporters argue that the concept of expertise has been so discredited that he, and anyone else for that matter, is entitled to express any views about any issue they want. That is not true. It is absolutely not true. Now, the beginning, it is true. Smith does say, I'm not an expert. I'm going to address that. Um, but the reason that we believe we can express any views on any issue is not because of expertise. It's because in America, we have freedom of speech. That means I can talk about whatever I want. If I wanted to have a religious podcast to talk about religion in general, I can do that. If I want to narrow it down and only talk about Christianity or only talk about Islam or Judaism, I can do that because I have the right to free speech. You, the audience, could listen to your heart's content, or you could tune me out and say, he's boring, he doesn't know what he's talking about, whatever, right? That's the reason, the core reason has nothing to do with expertise. It has everything to do with we're free Americans. That's part of our culture as an American, is that we can talk about whatever we want to talk about and however we want to talk about it. And if you want to listen, that's awesome. So let's see. Let's see here. Joe says part of the problem. I see what you did there. Unintentional, but yes. Let's see what else. Why don't we make sure we get um that Liberty Lady points out Nazi means nothing anymore. Same with racist. Exactly. That is. And then why is it is an and not Islandia as is Atlanteas tend to be freer? Question from my wife. Oh, I think I follow this in, in pos, podcast. I mean, I'm trying to understand this question. You might need to clarify a little bit there, Libertarian JRT. I don't think I fully understand. I think I kind of know where it's going, but just so that I'm clear, let me know. Please throw that in there so that I can be a little bit more clear. And again, folks, I'm kind of doing this a little bit more freely than I used to. So, and by the way, if you're posting in the chat on either X or Facebook, I cannot bring those up on the screen, but I will read them. For instance, Jack's Mike, who's listening on X, says, but Dave was also right about the supposed authorities are misleading and lie and wrong all the time. The pick and choose of these people is a joke. That is correct. And that is part of what made podcast popular. But that's not the reason. The problem with the experts is that a lot of the experts overextended their expertise or they leaped to conclusions that were not true. But more importantly, as you'll see when we play this video from Dave Rubin, more importantly, during COVID, you were punished for it. And that really ramped things up because people like to have a free voice. And if you silence them, they will be angry with you. But if you punish them, they're going to be very angry with you and they will retaliate in some way. So there's a lot going on here, but Constantine is incorrect. We don't believe that just because experts got some things wrong, bam, I can read, so therefore listen to me instead of the experts. It's not really how it works. How it works is I'm a free man. I can speak about what I want. You can listen to me if you want, and if I'm good enough, then I will amass a large following. What does good enough mean? Well, if I'm somewhat entertaining, maybe not funny entertaining, but interesting at least, and then somewhat informative on my opinions. And it doesn't have to necessarily be opinions that people always agree with. I listen to podcasts all the time of things that I don't agree with because I find it interesting. I'm curious what the other side has to say. Sometimes I want to sharpen my own views, and so I need to know, like, okay, what is it that they're criticizing my views about? What do I need to address? What do I need to look into? Sometimes my opinion has changed. Sometimes it's strengthened, and sometimes I've just created better arguments. So again, variety within the podcast world. All right. So then he goes on, he says, Murray's attempt to dismiss such views on the basis that they don't align with expert opinion is seen as an ineffective argument at best, an attempt at credentialism at worst. That's because it was. That's how it works in Podcastistan. You come here and you're like, look at all these credentials I got, whatever they are. Nobody cares. I mean, we do. Like, that's a good start. But then you have to demonstrate that you're able to communicate those ideas in a convincing manner. And if you cannot do that, then the fact that you're an expert doesn't mean anything. So it opens the door, and this has been the case. One of the ways that I could have ramped up my podcast is to spend time reaching out to experts and bringing them on, people that have degrees and stuff like that and written articles and subject to peer review. I could bring them on for various topics and talk with them, just like Joe Rogan does. I didn't particularly want to do that format. I wanted to do something different. Right? Like, I look at it and say, I think that everybody can be very intelligent, very smart, and knowledgeable about things. All they got to do is really read and then, engage in discourse and engage in a way where maybe not in the moment you concede, but you think about the conversation later. And then you're like, you know what? Maybe they did have a point. Maybe I need to reevaluate. So my show is something a little bit different. But if you come here into Podcastistan and you think your credentials are going to take you the distance, you're going to be sorely mistaken. And that is exactly what I think Murray did. Why do I say that? In a 3-hour podcast, he spent almost the first entire third of it arguing about who's an expert and who should be speaking and having a huge audience. That was his concern. Like, he could have taken all 3 hours to talk to Dave and say, all right, here's your perspective on this. Here's a counterpoint. Here's something I think you're missing. What about this event? What about what this person said over here? He didn't do virtually any of that, but he definitely didn't do it in the first third of it. He just argued basically about credentials. Like, that's what his argument was. There's a sliver of truth to this criticism. Engaging the argument someone is making directly is a much more powerful approach, but to suggest that arguments from authority are entirely invalid is silly. He would be correct if that's what people were saying. Since we're talking about, fallacies and whatnot, this is a straw man. Nobody that we're talking to is saying this. Dave, and somebody correct me, show me where he said it. But to my knowledge, Dave has never once said that the experts were wrong enough. We all get to talk instead of them because they're wrong and you have to listen to us and we are correct. He has never made such an assertion of any kind. He has said, I'm a free American. I talk about what I feel passionate about, and let's address the arguments, not the person. Because as every intellectual has ever acknowledged, there are people for which they have their credentials and they're wrong. I'll give you a great example. One that nobody's going to argue with. Well, most nobody. There's always somebody that'll argue with something, right? Remember the paper that came out saying that vaccines cause autism? Do you know who that came out? Like, I don't remember the guy's name, but he was an expert, right? He was a researcher. He had the credentials. And that paper was eventually pulled and deemed to be entirely wrong. Okay. So it does happen. There are people with the letters behind their name that end up being wrong, either consistently or from time to time. So there is truth to the criticism, yes, but nobody's really making this argument that experts no longer get to speak. That's how it's being interpreted. And for those that are interpreting it that way, that's a you problem. You need to figure out why you don't understand the reality on the ground here. All right, let's continue. Smith and Rogan are irked when Murray expresses his befuddlement that Smith has become a prominent voice in the debate about Israel and Palestine without ever having visited the Middle East. Okay? That clip was probably the clip I saw the most going around, and also the clip where most people that were trying to dunk on Dave were using. They were like, see, he's never been to Israel. He's never been to the Middle East. He doesn't belong talking about this. Okay, that is not attacking the argument. That is attacking the person. And that is exactly why the intelligentsia doesn't understand Podcastistan. You come on a podcast, we're talking ideas. Your credentials, they might get you in the door, but when you say something, you're going to be held accountable. But but not always. Why? Because sometimes it's not the nature of the show. For instance, Joe Rogan brings people on just to have a conversation. He's not there to debate ideas and to force one to win or lose. He's there just to talk about what he's interested in. People like that. It's genuine. He's not trying to force a message upon you. He's just like, I want to talk about this. And yes, it aligns more with how he views things, but he just has conversations with people. That's what he wants to do. He's not doing a podcast to suss out the right information necessarily. That's not his purpose. Okay. The shock at the idea that someone ought to see things with their own eyes before commenting on them is palpable. Indeed, in the aftermath of the debate, Smith promoted a popular video in which Murray's statements to this effect are contrasted with his previous ridicule of the concept of lived experience. Then Constantine goes and he tries to downplay, like, oh well, they didn't really understand this video, blah blah blah. But again, I don't think the intelligentsia are understanding the core of the argument that we're having here in Podcastistan. We are arguing and saying, like, number one, reading can take you a long way. Number two, yes, most of us would probably agree that if you can get out to a place and lay eyes on it, it's a good idea. But it doesn't necessarily make or break your argument. It depends. It depends on how much of the information is available elsewhere. Is there information about if the only way? So I was just reading an article the other day about a guy. It's an American guy. He went over to India. He's been arrested. There's a small, tiny island of people that you're legally not permitted to go to this island. It's a small tribe of people. I think they estimate it to be under like 500 people, and this tribe is like thousands of years old or hundreds of years old, and I think they do things the very old tribe way, right? They're not an industrialized society by any stretch of the imagination. And to protect the people, the state of India has said nobody is allowed to go there. Number one, if you go there, there's a good chance that they will kill you in the first place. So this guy tried to go there and deliver coke or something like that, and he's in jail now for visiting this island that he was not supposed to be at, and he was trying to make contact and learn more about these people. This island is so remote and so untouched that when you look up the language, which they have a term for the language, they actually have a name for the language that these people speak. They will tell you nobody knows much about the language. Like it's very unknown. Like there's a lot that's unknown about these people because the government in India just says you're not allowed to go there. Okay, and so the idea is if you wanted to talk about these people, because there's not a lot of information out about that you can draw from experts, from people that have been there, then yes, in that particular case, it would be wise of you. It would almost be critical that you go there. On the other hand, if you're talking about the Middle East, which like how many books have been written, how many articles have been written, how many podcasts, how many documentaries, how many news stories, how much information is really out there about what's going on in the Middle East. We can go and look up government records and see what people said and what bills and legislation were passed and what policies were written regarding the Middle East. We can go and look up all of this stuff and get a picture of what's going on without ever having set foot on the ground. Now, I will agree, if you set foot on the ground, it really puts a lot of that information into perspective. Will you come away with a different idea? Maybe, maybe not. As Dave pointed out on the show, he said a lot of people have been to the Middle East and they agree with Douglas. A lot of people have been to the Middle East and agree with Dave, right? So the idea that we should harp on this and make it a key point is absurd. And that's what's going on. They continue to make this point because it's about the credentials. Did you operate in the way we say you should operate? That again, not how Podcastistan works. Um, Goes on and says, the great trick being deployed here. Am I got it up on the screen? I don't. Let me get back up on the screen here, just as a courtesy to folks. All right. So the great trick being deployed here is to allege that experts can't be trusted while relying on a different set of experts. No, that is false. That's not true. There's no trick being played. Now, there might, and I'm saying this generalizing, there might be some for which that applies. For Dave, since he's the centerpiece of this argument, that is not true. What we're saying is the experts cannot be trusted, so we should question everything and have conversations and push back on what they have told us. It's not that we're relying on a different set of experts. Some people do. It's that we are saying you have done such a disservice that you have forced us to go seek out other voices on this topic. And now we're going to question a lot more of that narrative. Now, sometimes some people will question and they'll go crazy far. This is where you get the people online who are like, the Jews are running the world. Okay. Those people would be the ones where you would say are so steeped in this idea that experts can't be trusted that they rely on an entirely different set of experts, almost to the point where the experts can only say the exact opposite. And if they don't say the exact opposite, then they must be in bed with the experts that we're dismissing. That is a small portion of people in Podcastistan. Again, that is not Dave. That is not me. And that is not many other people, particularly people that have some of the larger voices. That is not not all of them. There are some people with large audiences that do push really bizarre ideas. That comes with the territory. That's what it means to be a free person, to talk about what you want to talk about and cultivate an audience based on what you find interesting. Maybe you find conspiracy theories interesting. Maybe you don't. Maybe you only want to hear what has been verified by a number of people who have um, who have done the work to present themselves as a trustworthy source, right? Maybe you want somebody that's a little bit speaks a little bit more down to you, not down at you, but down to you, like in a language that, not a lofty language. And they're speaking more casually. They're not as polished, but they happen to be very, very knowledgeable, and they're offering a different perspective, right? Again, it's wide range. And what they're doing is they're taking out a small niche and they're saying, this is Podcastistan. No, it's not. It's part of it. In the same way that in the credentialed world, there are people who really want to seek out truth, and there are people for which they're just seeking power. That happens too. And it would be inappropriate to label all of the credentialist world, the intelligentsia, based on one segment of it. So they're doing exactly what they wouldn't want done to them. All opinions are valid and should be given a hearing. Scream the people whose entire media diet is made up of people who only push their preferred perspective. Okay, that is partially true. Dave actually said the very opposite on the show. He said, no, not everybody should be given a voice necessarily. Not everybody should be platformed. Not that he was calling for people to be censored, but just there are some people for which what they have to say is so terrible and so useless that other people should say, no, I don't want to bring you on my show. That's what it means. Not censorship, just people individually making their own decision and saying, yeah, I don't think that's good. I don't want that. And for me, like if Destiny, who's popular, he's got a bigger audience than I do. If somebody were to reach out and say, hey, Destiny wants to come on your podcast, almost a guarantee I'm going to say no. Because I don't want to have a conversation with him. Not interested. I think he's, I just feel like he is so loose with the facts that he wouldn't fit on my show. And I don't like the way that he engages with people. So I'm not interested. Not going to have him on my show for the same reason is I don't think his opinion is valid. And that's how other people do it. That's how Joe Rogan does it. Joe Rogan's like, look, who do I as Joe Rogan find interesting? As for experience, the woke concept of lived experience was not ridiculed because experience doesn't matter. You would have to deeply you would have to be deeply dishonest to deny that experiences are informative. If Michael Jordan claimed that there is a correct way to dunk a basketball based on his experience and conversations with Kobe Bryant, do you imagine Smith and his defenders would screech about MJ just using arguments from authority and lived experience? No, but I think he's making an error here. So Michael Jordan is not an expert be in the context of other people saying he's an expert, which tends to be what credentialism is, right? You become an expert. Like if I were to go to, let's put it this way. Let's say I go to college and I'm studying to be a philosopher. And so I read all the philosophy books. I read all the criticism. I watch podcasts. I listen to, documentaries. I study. I turn in my papers. I write really good stuff. And people are like, wow, this guy's really, really smart. We're pretending. Okay. I get it, but we're pretending. So let's say this happens. And then I write more papers and people are like, wow, this dude's got some really neat ideas. And then other people, other philosophers, they read it and they're like, okay, well, I think he's making a mistake here, but this is a really interesting point. We should further, this particular idea. Here's where he's wrong on this idea, blah, blah. And so we go back and forth. I get peer reviewed, blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, my credential is because the world around me said you did a good job, right? It's a little bit different with Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan is an expert at basketball because he delivered, and there wasn't really a group of experts that were saying, yeah, you did good. He dribbled down the court and dunked on people. He got a point, an unmistakable, undeniable point. Everybody could see it. He shoots the ball goes in the basket. Point or points, right? That's objective. There is no experts decided they really liked it. None of that. There is no he did that without making a fallacy. None of that. It's a bit different. So I don't know that his comparison really holds very well here because Michael Jordan delivered. He delivered points that every expert and non-expert could clearly and objectively see and accept. It didn't require only other experts to validate it. Every dummy that barely can speak but can watch a basketball game and decipher who's winning could see that Jordan, almost said Jackson, Michael Jordan is an expert. And people put their butts in the seat to see it because they saw he was so good, because they could see it. And so there wasn't really any debate to be had. If I write a philosophy paper, there is debate to be had on whether or not it's a good paper. If Michael Jordan scores the most points of any player in a game, there is no debate to be had. He scored objectively the most points in the game. So, yes, he's right. We wouldn't argue if there's a correct way, right? If he said this is the correct way to dunk a basketball. Now, if we were skilled at basketball and we played it a lot, or maybe we didn't even play, maybe we just watched it, we might argue and say, well, there's another way. So maybe there are two correct ways to dunk a basketball. We might say, look at this guy over here. Look at Larry Bird, trying to keep it within the same time frame. Look at Larry Bird. Look how he dunks a basketball. It's slightly different than how you dunk a basketball. So we might make that argument. So the idea, number one, that Michael Jordan is a good comparison, I think is wrong. Number two, I think the idea that we wouldn't argue with Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant is also wrong. Has he never watched ESPN? They argue all the time about this stuff. So that does happen. So he's not even talking about what happens in reality. People actually do this. They do it for a different reason, and we hold these people as experts, if you will, in their particular fields for a different reason. There is a different reason why somebody in sports would be considered an expert at their craft versus somebody who's in the arena of ideas. They're two different things with two different types of criteria and two different ways of validating it. All right. Let's see, is that it? On numerous occasions throughout the discussion, Murray commits the greatest sin available in Podcastistan, suggesting that certain people shouldn't comment on certain things and that others should not elevate their voices. That is absolutely correct. In our world, we don't operate on we might say, hey, like I've said before, people shouldn't have destiny on. And the way that I'm saying it, the context is people shouldn't have destiny on because I just don't think he's a value add to the conversation, right? Just plain and simple. But if you want to have him on, that's fine. I'm not going to spend a great deal of my time arguing. I'm just going to move on. That's what happens in podcast. I move on. If I see that a podcaster starts having on a bunch of guests that I don't particularly care for, I will just tune out and I will find another podcast. Now, if I happen to like that one, I might gripe a little bit about it and say, hey, I wish you'd go back to what you used to do. But I'm ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm not going to put a lot of effort in trying to keep somebody off the show. And Dave experienced this in the libertarian community years ago because he had a podcast and he would bring on guests and people would get mad and they go, how come you were platforming this guy? And we would be like, look, we will platform who the hell we want to platform. That was the pushback from the Podcastistan folks. We will talk to who we want to talk to. You do not have that say. Now you can say, hey, I think that was a bad guest. Maybe not, maybe don't do that again. Like you can say it in terms of perhaps having a conversation to influence, but you don't get to say it in the context of demanding it. It's not going to happen. It's not how it works. The world of entertainment is not driven by truth seeking, and the claim that someone's ideas are false is no longer an effective critique. Podcastistan is a place where people scold the mainstream media for failing to live up to their standards in honesty and accuracy while having none of their own. It's not true, though. We do have standards. The difference, I would say, is that our standards are not steeped in a formal process. There are not formal processes that anybody, like if you grab Douglas Murray and you put him in a room and you ask him, what are some of the things that it's going to take to get to your level? And he's going to write a list down. And then if you say, let's see, who else might Constantine, like take Constantine, and you sit him in a different room and he doesn't know what Douglas is writing. And you ask him the same question. And then you say, please write down everything. There's going to be a lot of overlap between the two, right? You could probably do a similar thing to bigger names in the podcast realm. And you could say, what are the things that are going to make you successful in this world? What are the things that are going to attract a large audience? And they're going to tell you some of those things. I do some of those things myself. I try to cite my sources, number one. That's a big thing that I try to do. And you see this in podcasts all the time. They'll say, hey, the link is in the show notes. How many times have you heard that? The link is in the show notes. What a lot of us will try to do, and the reason why podcasts are so long form is because, like Constantine said, the sound bites won't do. They don't work here. I mean, they do for a good laugh, but they don't work if we're trying to really have a serious conversation. So what do? We pull up videos and we'll play of 4 or 5. Sometimes there are 10-minute video. Some people will literally live stream an entire video, stop and talk along the way. Some people, while the stream is happening, this is particularly prevalent with when like the president speaks and stuff like that, they will live stream the speech and they will give their commentary along the way. So if the president speaks for 45 minutes, the podcast might be an hour and a half as they're pausing periodically to chime in and offer their commentary. That's what happens in this, and you don't see that in the mainstream world, right? When the president speaks, they just play it and then they might occasionally chime in, but they generally don't. They let him speak. We don't do that in the podcast world. We will stop it. We will take his 45-minute speech and walk through it and make it an hour and a half podcast if we have to, or make a 20-minute speech an hour podcast, whatever, right? And we will play it. And we do that. We do response videos. I've done them myself. We've gotten a lot of people get in trouble from doing the response videos on YouTube because we end up getting a violation for using copyrighted material. But this is the podcast world, and it operates differently, and they seem not to understand that. Okay, so I've been at it for about an hour and 15 minutes. Let me go to an intermission here real quick. We're going to come back, and then we will continue on with this show. Let me clear up my voice a little bit, get something to drink. So we will be right back. Hey, Liberty fam, do me a favor. If you enjoy the show, be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, I want you to hit that bell so that you never miss an episode. By the way, if you want to support the show, head over to libertydad.locals.com and sign up. For $5, you can be part of this show. There, I'll engage supporters of the show. We'll discuss topics that you want me to talk about, response videos that you would like to see, or anything related to the show. And I'll even have a monthly subscribers only episode. By the way, I'm always looking for dads to join me for Dad Talk. That's my series where I invite everyday dads on to talk about what's important to them in the context of being a dad. No argument, no debate, and dads choose the topic. It's my way of raising dad voices. If you're a dad or you know a dad who has something to say, let's get connected. Episodes air live on Friday mornings or Friday evenings, whichever works best for dads. All right, let's get back to the show. All right, there we go. I hit the microphone audio button there. So, okay, so going back to my friend Libertarian JRT, he was asking that question about the using the ending like Podcastistan, and so he was saying the difference between Podcastistan versus podcast. Did I get it right? Podcastalandia. Um, I don't know why I didn't choose the term, but if you noticed, I had a little bit easier time with Podcastistan. So maybe that's a good reason instead of Podcastalandia. That just doesn't roll off the tongue so well. It may be more accurate, but the way that it's funny, the way that language works is it doesn't always work for logical reasons per se. It a lot of times it's formulated in spreads just based on usage. And I would assume that if you talk to a linguist, they'll say that sometimes usage ends up being what people find comfortable, what rolls off the tongue well, those kind of things. So let's see. Let's go on with some other comments here. Uh, So here somebody says, Murray was absolutely right. Murray simply said a person that has credentials, as does the work, has more credibility. Yes, with intelligentsia, but not necessarily in Podcastistan. They might, right? Like if you were to say like DL, does Douglas Murray have more credentials? Is he more trustworthy on like say the Middle East than you? Yes. Yes, he would be. And I would acknowledge that. But it's not really because of his credentials. It's because he's simply more knowledgeable about that particular topic. I would say the same for Dave. There's a reason why you don't hear me talk a whole lot about foreign policy. It's not my wheelhouse. And not everybody in Podcastistan has the sense to kind of stick to what they're good at. However, not everybody in intelligentsia land either. Like they don't as well. Many, and we've seen this, and they've been criticized by their own peers. So this is not just me trying to punch up and trying to make a point that I don't belong making. This has been made by people like Thomas Sowell, who is part of that intelligentsia crowd, and he has pointed out. I think his famous comment is the I'm going to butcher it a little bit, but I'm going to try to get it paraphrased correctly. He said, the biggest value in having a degree from Harvard is that he doesn't have to be looked down upon by somebody that has a degree from Harvard, something like that. And he's basically like, look, people can't use that as a cudgel against me, an intellectual cudgel to say, yeah, you don't know what you're talking about because you're not a Harvard trained intellectual like I am. He can actually go, no, actually I am. So therefore that insult no longer works. And he's making a good point. And he's made this point about intelligentsia. Other people have made this point that a lot of people will be good in one area. And then because that area maybe doesn't sell well, right? Maybe they're a linguist and the population is not really interested in linguistics. So they traverse and they move over into talking about race and culture. And they might be good at it. They might not be good at it. But the fact that they were good as a linguist has nothing to do with how good they are talking about race and culture. By the way, I pick up that example from John McWhorter. If you've never heard John McWhorter, I encourage you to go look him up. John, McWhorter, I believe. So look him up. He's really interesting. He is not a libertarian. He's not even right wing. He's actually, I believe he describes himself as a cantankerous Democrat. I believe is how he describes himself. But when it comes to race and culture, he has some really great insights, even though he's a linguist. That's his that is his specialty, linguistics. And he can tell you all about linguistics. He was a linguistics professor at a couple of different schools. That's what he's good at, but he's also very good at talking about these other topics. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't. There are people for which they talk about stuff, and I don't think they do such a good job. I felt that way about Richard Dawkins back in the day. Like I thought he was really good talking about science, but then when he started criticizing religion, I felt like a lot of his arguments fell flat. They just weren't as good. I was like, look, you tried to traverse into a different area that's not your expertise, and I don't think you did so well. That's how it goes. Let's see what else. I thought, yes, I agree. Murray's joke about libertarians being bisexuals of politics was funny. That it really was. That was probably his best line. Yes, Noam Chomsky is a linguist, and sometimes he talks about things that are not linguistic in nature, and he has some great insight. Other times, maybe not so much, right? So, but yes, there is a difference between podcast and what that Liberty Lady points out is the mainstream media. Every time I listen to 10 to 12 podcasts a week, and that's separate from my podcast bros that I moderate for, right? So she's pointing out that there's a difference. Everybody in the podcast world knows there is a difference, and things operate differently here. Okay, so I want to talk about this expert thing real quick. So let me pull up this image. Yes, here it is. So this is my friend Jeremy Kaufman. And he made a very good insight. He said, I mostly agree with Smith on in the clips I've seen, but actually agree with Murray on expertise. Dave Smith is expressing false humility when he acts like he's just a random average person. Dave has spent more time learning about American foreign policy than 99+% of Americans. Then he goes on to say, Dave Smith is an expert on foreign policy. Daryl Cooper is an expert on World War II. If Dan Carlin is not a historian, then most historians aren't historians either. We can debate to what degree these people are correct, but the notion they are not experts is ludicrous. Expertise comes from practice, not credential. I think he nailed it entirely right there. An expert is somebody that, again, if you can sit down and you can have debates with multiple people, and let's just take Dave, since we're kind of talking about him. Dave has been able to sit down and have debates with other people, number of people, and he will name names. He will cite comments. He will cite documents. He will state facts and figures. He will talk dates. He will talk events, and he will do it over a span of like several decades or even longer, right? And he can talk about foreign policy and his issues with it for hours. I agree with Jeremy. He is an expert. Whether he's always right or how often he's right is another matter. And I think what Podcastistan is doing is showing that we need to have a different term or revise the term expert. Expert means that you know a lot about a topic, whether or not you bring it all together to further humanity or further other ideas, whether or not you can do that well, that is a different matter. I personally think that Dave does it very well. Is he always correct on something? No, nobody's always correct on anything. Is he mostly correct? I think so. From what little I've been able to see, he is mostly correct. I also kind of judge based on how his critics respond. His critics don't spend time breaking down where he's made a mistake and say, okay, here's what he said. He said this. And if we go back and we look at the record, here's a primary source and look at what the record shows. And then look what this other document here shows. And it shows that Dave has been actually speaking incorrectly on this particular element of this topic, right? Like that's not what's happening. That's not what happened in the podcast. Even when they got past being experts, that's not what happened. They went back and forth, and there were times where Dave conceded. There were times where Douglas conceded. And there were times where both of them agreed. So in several hours of conversation, Dave was able to get a credentialed person to agree with him on numerous points. He was able to get a credentialed person to concede on a couple of points. Other points, he wasn't able to get him to concede. That's the nature of conversations. That's how they work. So from my perspective, Dave is, yes, he would be considered an expert. Am I an expert? No, not of anything. I don't claim to be an expert. And I don't claim to be an expert in a different way that Dave doesn't claim to be an expert. I think Jeremy is correct. It's a bit of a false humility. I think Dave needs to reconsider and say, you know what? You're right. On this, I am an expert. On these other areas, maybe he's not an expert, right? Maybe he can't talk about them at length. Maybe he can't cite sources and quotes and dates and events as well as he can in foreign policy. So he wouldn't be an expert in those areas, even if he could say, I'm knowledgeable enough to have a dinner table conversation. It's an entirely different thing. I think I'm knowledgeable enough to have dinner table conversations in many areas, right? So that's, and what I do, my shtick, if you will, is to say, let's talk about how we understand information. Let's talk about the ability that people have to understand information. That's my goal. And so I go and I do as much research as I possibly can on a topic before I talk about it, or I acknowledge right up front my limitations. And then my goal is just to show you, like, look, if I can do this and I can just read and learn, you can too. Because I believe that people can be way more intelligent than we are. And what we need is to promote this idea that you can be intelligent, you can learn, you can understand things. And I think what's happening is the credentialed world, in trying to maintain their credentialed world, kind of pushes that away. And so Podcastistan is kind of the pushback in a sense, right? I think people want to be informed about stuff. They may not want to easily change their views, but I think they want to be informed. And I think with the right caliber of person, views can be changed, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. That's how it works. You cannot have one without the other. And I think the credentialists are trying to have one without the other. All right. So let's see. I got some other stuff here, and let's go to this video here. And let's see. Is this the one? I think this is the one. Let me double check. Okay. So let's do this. Let's address a couple of things really quickly. And this might actually go a little bit longer than I intended. We'll see. Number one, let's find out why Douglas and Dave Smith were there, because a lot of people. Let's see, where did that? Let me see. Well, let me see. Yes, I think this is a good one. So here's from James Lindsay. He said Murray not only won the debate, which I disagree with, he won it against an ambush and in a way where most people don't have a clue what he actually did. I'm going to take an issue with this ambush. He wasn't ambushed. And this is like James would fall into the category of intellectuals, the intelligentsia. And here he is being incorrect, and I'm going to prove it. I will prove it right now that he was absolutely incorrect. Here's Joe Rogan at the very, very beginning, first like 2 minutes of the show. Maybe.
The goal of this is every time I see people that disagree with anything that's happening, any gigantic world events, it's one of these retarded shows where they're screaming. There's the word again. We brought it. Yeah. We were just talking about that. You did it early. The word retarded is back. And it's one of the great culture victories that I think is spurred on probably by podcasts. But these things are always like Pierce Morgan-y, which is fine, where everyone's screaming over each other and, there's 5 different people talking over each other. There's never just rational conversations where you discuss things. And I respect both of you. I think both of you are brilliant. And I bet you agree on a lot of things, and I bet you disagree on a lot of things. And it'd be fascinating to see your perspectives on these things. So that's why you're here together.
Okay. So they're there to have a conversation. They're there because Joe Rogan says, I respect both of you, and I want to see what comes out of this conversation. There was no ambush. He told them right up front, and I will presume, because I don't know, I will presume that everybody was kind of already aware of this from the beginning. I'm going to suspect, because nobody pushed back, nobody said, that's not what you told me when you called me up and asked me to come on the show. right? Nobody said that. So they seem to have agreed that they were there to have a conversation with each other because they both had different perspectives. And Joe Rogan was just very curious and like, man, I just want to know. I want to know how you would respond to this guy's comment, how you'll respond to his comment, where you agree, where you disagree. That's what he said. He said his purpose. And a lot of people, James Lindsay and many other people, they presented it as if, like, oh, he brought his buddy on, to counter the narrative. In fact, you know who did that? Douglas Murray did that. Let me show you here. So here's another article. This is one that came out just a couple days ago. Opinion by Douglas Murray. So-called Israel Hamas Ukraine war experts spew false info on Joe Rogan's podcast. There has to be a standard. By the way, if anybody's old enough, you'll know this. Remember Air America? This is years and years and years ago. Air America was the AM radio counterpoint to Rush Limbaugh. Because Rush Limbaugh was responsible for reviving AM radio, and then a lot of conservative talking heads became very popular on AM radio, and Air America was their response and didn't do very well for a number of reasons, and it ultimately ended up going bankrupt and going under. However, at that time and throughout Limbaugh's career, there were constant calls for people to say, there has to be a standard. You can't just have so many people listening to you. We need equal time. This needs to be enforced, which is weird because that seems to be the same path that Douglas is at least looking at, if not already starting to walk down. So what does he say? Last week, I seemed to break the internet. I'm skipping around here a little bit. I've been on Joe's podcast a number of times, and I've always enjoyed it. Skipping down here. Let's see. But this time I went on with a question. Having not spoken to Joe since the wars in Ukraine and Israel started, I had become increasingly irked that the guests he has had on have almost entirely anti-Ukraine and anti-Israel. Many of the latter are particular and not just vindictively and maliciously anti-Israel, but have been spewing claims that are demonstrably false. Many are also people who are simply in no way an expert at what they are talking about. One of these is a comedian who goes by the name of Dave Smith, claiming some Jewish ancestry. Like just the way that he phrased it, claiming some Jewish. He's not claiming it. He is Jewish. He's not claiming anything. I claim to be Native American because of my ancestry result. It would be more accurate to say DL claims Native American ancestry because I'm only doing it on the basis of ancestry, like my results from ancestry, not because I have any particular connection through family that I can point to, right? And there's reasons for that we don't need to get into. But Dave knows, like he's like, my grandparents, I think he said, were in the Holocaust. He's not claiming Jewish ancestry. It's basically a fact. He has spent, and this is another failure to get things right. He has spent 18 months since October 7th, 2023, being very unfunny indeed. Okay, maybe that's not the fact. Specifically, he has decided to spend his time going around the podcast world sounding off about Israel. Okay, let me try to show you something here, really quickly. This may go long, and that's okay. I'm not too upset about it. So let's do this. All right, so this is I pulled something up from Dave Smith. So this is a search of his tweets, and I said, show me all of his tweets that say foreign policy up until December 31st, 2020. Okay. I want you to look. I'm going to scroll through here. These are all tweets. Tweet after tweet. 2016, 2020, 2019, 2012, 2020, 2018, 2019, 2019 again. Like all these tweets. 2020, right? 2019, 2019, right? Okay, come over here. Middle East. Okay. Look at that. 2020, 2014, 2020, 2018, 2019, 2019, 2018, right? He has been talking about this since like forever. This is not new. This idea that all of a sudden there was an attack on October 7th and all of a sudden Dave decides that he's the expert and he's talking about it. That's not true. Douglas did not do his homework. He has no idea who he's talking about. And that's not the first time, because check out this clip from Joe Rogan. It's a little bit on the longer side, but we're going to play it here. Am I get it?
Can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since the war in Israel began and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Can I ask you something?
Yes, sir.
Since
I'm gonna
the war
speed
in
it up.
Israel began and since the war in Ukraine began, you've had quite a lot of people who are very against both in different ways.
Yes.
Do you think you've had enough people on who are supportive of either war?
I don't know that word enough, if that's a good word.
Let's say enough people who are on the side of Israel instead of wild critics.
Well, I've had a few. I mean, I believe God Sad is on the side of Israel.
For sure.
Jordan is on the side of Israel.
You had Mike Baker, Coleman
yeah.
Hughes.
Yeah. I've had,
Coleman did it for like 20 minutes. So it wasn't why he was here.
no, I mean, none of them. And none of them is why they're here.
Okay. So again, see what I mean? He doesn't understand the nature of the show. He thinks that Joe Rogan is bringing on people to argue against Israel. He's bringing on people that he finds interesting. That's what he said. That's what he's repeatedly said. And he's like, that's not what I brought them on here for. Continue listening.
You know, it's a good question.
Do you think you've tilted one way?
Me personally,
No, just with the guests you've had.
the guess, yeah, probably more tilted towards the idea that perhaps the way they've done it is barbaric.
But why do you think that is? Just out of interest. I'm just
'Cause
interested in your selection of guests because you're like the world's number one podcast.
Yeah, it's not.
It's-
I don't think about it that way.
Oh, that's interesting. He doesn't think about it that way. And he said this kind of stuff before. The nature of his show is he's bringing on people he finds interesting to talk to that he likes. That's how it works in Podcastistan. We don't seek out experts to try to, evaluate our work. That's not how it goes here. That's how it goes in intelligentsia, in the credential world, but that's not how it works here. This is what I'm saying. Like, these guys have come in and they don't seem to understand the world, that the culture that they're trying to be a part of. And it would be the same way as if I went and I was trying to gain credentials by doing things that are more acceptable in the podcast world. You have to do things differently. Put it in a different example. If you play at the NBA, there are very specific rules for which exist all the time. They don't change. But if you go out to the local basketball court, there may be different ways that the game is played. They may have some home rules, or you might know them as what's the term? They might say these are the street ball rules, right? Like and they're going to vary a little bit. They might say like, hey, we don't call fouls. You just play and it gets a little rough out here. I've played those, right? They might say, hey, we don't do this or we do that. Or, they short circuit things to adapt to what they're trying to accomplish, to something different. So yes, street ball, playing ball on the street is not going to be the same and not going to follow the same rules as the NBA. And you should have the sense that if you're playing in the NBA, you go by the NBA rules. If you're playing on the street, then you go by whatever rules are being played there. My younger brother actually had that problem when he wanted to play by Major League Baseball rules when they played baseball, and he got really upset about it. We were like, look, people play by they have house rules, and they're going to make up different rules. That's how you play. He had to learn to understand that, and it was very difficult for him. And it seems like it's very difficult for the intelligentsia to enter into a world and not recognize that the rules, the norms are different. But it's really bad when somebody tells you what they're up to and you still don't get it.
I just think I'd like to talk to this person.
But can I just, sorry, it's your show, but
Sure.
If you're going to interview historians of the conflict or historians in general, why would you get somebody like Ian Carroll or...
Yeah, but Ian Carroll, I didn't bring him on for that purpose.
Okay, so right there, again, he didn't bring Ian Carroll on to talk about history. He didn't bring him. Now listen to his answer.
Brought him on because I want to find out, like, how does one get involved in the whole conspiracy theory business? Because his whole thing is just conspiracies.
Sure.
Okay. So right there, Douglas doesn't know the people that he's talking about. He has no idea. He's just like, oh, Ian Carroll, the historian. And Joe's like, yeah, that's not why I brought him on. I brought him on because he is a conspiracy theorist and I was curious about it. Right? So if you're going to go on somebody's show and you're like, I'm the expert, you should listen to me. You should probably have a better understanding of the people that you're criticizing.
But do you have any, there's been a tilt in the conversation, in both conversations in the last couple of years, and it's largely to do with people who have appointed themselves experts who are not experts.
You mean like
Okay. So, well, let's listen.
Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Oh, Daryl Cooper
Darryl?
does not think he's an expert.
In fact, I think it's everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, I'm just a history.
Have you
nerd."
ever absorbed any of his material? Have you ever consumed any of his podcasts or anything like
I
that?
tried.
Yeah?
It's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk.
So why should I continue to listen to Douglas Murray? He doesn't know who Ian Carroll is. He doesn't know who Daryl Cooper is because he couldn't even get his name right. He didn't know what Ian Carroll's shtick is. Everybody that watches Ian Carroll, they know he talks about conspiracy stuff. We all know this. Nobody is going to Ian Carroll for history. They might go for an element in history, but it still falls within conspiracy. We all know this. Douglas does not know this. So now, and this is like, I don't remember exactly how far into this is at the very beginning. So this is only like 4 or 5 minutes into the show, and he's already making egregious errors because he doesn't know the purpose that he seems to not know the purpose of why he's on the show. He doesn't seem to know why Joe brings on people that he brings on. He doesn't know what Ian Carroll is all about. He doesn't know why Ian Carroll was even brought on the show. He doesn't understand. He doesn't know Daryl Cooper's name. He has not watched any of his stuff, which is fine. He doesn't have to. I'm not going to make although I will say, if you're going to make an argument that somebody should visit the Middle East so they'll have a better understanding of the Middle East rather than just talking about it from what they've read, then perhaps your argument should not be, I don't have to listen to Daryl because of some clip that I've seen that I didn't like on the internet, even though he's produced some 30 some hours, for which I might find I agree with him on a lot of things, right? But he doesn't know that because he hasn't done his due diligence, which is a word that'll come up here in just a minute. Let's continue watching.
Or I don't know about this, or I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
Yeah, but that's not
I think that's a
exactly
little
that's
bit
not
out of
exactly what
context.
Daryl was saying. I mean, Daryl's point of view, however you feel about this, what Daryl's saying is he doesn't really like doing debates. He likes to do long format stuff where he can really
Yeah.
explain
But
his position.
if you throw a lot of shit out there, there's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing.
And I agree. I think he's making a very fair point there. Like at some point, you're no longer really just asking questions because all your questions are narrowed in to a specific viewpoint, right? They're leading to a particular direction. And we know this. And so I think it's fair to make that criticism. But I think the problem here is that, again, he's entering in a world for which he does not understand. He does not understand why we do things here in Podcastistan. He doesn't get it. He doesn't understand the personalities. He doesn't understand why they become popular. He doesn't get it because Podcastistan does not operate the same as Credentialistan. I don't know.
You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Daryl's doing that?
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that.
I
I
think-
think Dave is doing that, very obviously. Dave's a comedian, but he's now mainly talking about Israel.
Okay, so as I just showed to you, Dave has been talking about Israel for over a decade, or at least a decade. He's popular now because of the rise of podcast, because that all that knowledge has basically caught up with him, and there was an opportunity for which he was able to seize. That is why Dave is popular. Now, if Dave had just started talking about it and hadn't been talking about it for years, he would not have the accumulated knowledge to speak the way that he does, and he would not be as popular. If I decided that I was going to be the next Dave Smith and talk about foreign policy, it would not go well for me because I do not have a decade of experience of talking about it, talking with other people, reading documents, looking up facts, reading books, listening to other voices. I don't have the decade that he has. Therefore, I would not be able to in any way jump in right now and become popular talking about specifically about foreign policy. I wouldn't be able to do it. Dave is, because as that I like to say, luck favors the prepared. Once that opportunity came around to go on shows, he was prepared by having talked about it for a decade and read about it for a decade. That's why he can spit out. That's why the latter 2/3 of this show, he was able to hold his ground. And I think that made the intelligentsia very angry. I think they were expecting Dave to crumble under this whole expertise thing. He didn't, because again, you came into our house and you got it wrong on the you didn't listen. You came into our house and you didn't understand the vibe. You didn't understand the forum that you were in and the rules, if you will, even if they're unspoken and unwritten. You didn't understand what they were. You didn't understand the players in this realm. You got it all wrong and you stepped in. So he's doing exactly what he's criticizing. Exactly. Right? Maybe not on the topic of Israel, but in the topic of expertise and Podcastistan, he's doing exactly what he's claiming that he's against.
I don't know if I'm mainly talking about Israel.
That's
but
all I see you
have
on the internet
opinions.
doing.
Yeah, but that's you.
Well,
just
There it is. That's all I see you on the internet doing. Okay, well, I've listened to plenty of Dave's podcast. He talks about all kinds of things. He does primarily talk about foreign policy, as he's admitted. That's his thing. That's what he's passionate about. That's what I would say he's an expert about.
You've seen,
It's
but
just
I don't
you
think that's.
consuming
But that is also your shtick now, isn't it?
Well, what do you mean by that's my shtick?
Well, you're not a geopolitics guy in general, are you?
I don't even know exactly what you're asking.
I'm saying you've decided, being a comedian, you've decided now to become somebody who talks about Israel.
This
and
is not,
conflict.
I think you're incorrect. I don't think it's a decision. I just think you
What?
have long form conversations, multiple of them. It's a huge event that's in the news, so it comes up. I don't think
know,
it's a
but-
thing. I think if you're on the outside, you'd say, "Oh, look, they're trying to get attention by talking about this very polarizing issue
Yeah.
publicly."
But
That's not.
you do get attention from that. If you'd spent the
Sure.
last year speaking about Myanmar, you would not be on my lips.
Yeah, but
or a
he
lot of other
does
people's.
talk about Yemen constantly. He talks about a lot of
Mhm.
things that aren't in the news.
Well, I
constantly.
tend to talk about the conflicts that my government is directly involved in, which I think is reasonable to me. But I don't quite get, like, what's all the appeal to authority stuff? I mean, you
Well,
have to be an expert, or
No,
and
I think
what
authority
exactly makes
matters.
you
I
an
think
expert?
authority matters, and I think that if you just throw a lot of shit out there and then say I'm not interested in the alternative views on this, and particularly when it's a counter narrative that is wildly off.
Okay, so what's very interesting about this is who he's talking to while he's making this argument. He's like, look, you just throw a bunch of stuff out there and they're not interested. Dave has always been interested in debating people. And he is, as far as I know, he has never turned down a debate unless there was a legitimate conflict in schedule. Like, hey, I've got a comedy special that I'm doing over here. I can't be over there. So therefore, yeah, I'm going to have to turn down this debate at this particular time. But to my knowledge, he has not turned down a debate against anybody. And he has encouraged debates with plenty of people that I presume Murray would welcome as an expert. So for instance, he went and had a debate with Dennis Prager. He has been willing to have a debate with Ben Shapiro. That doesn't seem to be materializing anytime soon. He is currently in this video having a debate or a conversation, if you will, as Joe Rogan put it, with Douglas Murray, who considers himself, I presume, to be more knowledgeable on this topic than Dave. So Dave has not run away from the idea of having his ideas challenged. And he practically begs Douglas to confront his ideas. Practically begs him. He's like, dude, stop worrying about authority. What ideas do you have an issue with? That's how it works in Podcastistan. We don't care about your credentials too much further than, wow, you might be an interesting person to talk to and you've had some good speeches. Let's bring you on and see where it goes. Beyond that, your credentials don't matter. You need to be able to communicate to the masses, to the regular, everyday, average folk. That is one of the reasons why Dave is so popular. It's one of the reasons why Rush Limbaugh was so popular. Whether you agree with him or not, he spoke to everyday average people. It's one of the reasons why Donald Trump is so popular, because everyday average people thinks or believe that he is speaking to them like them. even though they all know he's a billionaire and that he's an entirely different class. But the way that he comes across is welcoming. Same thing for George W. Bush, and in some ways, the same way for Obama. A lot of people liked and felt like, hey, Obama's a really prestigious speaker. He's really good at it. This is the kind of person that I can identify with. It's a different crowd, but it's basically the same reason, right? So in our world, one of the things is you need to be able to communicate about the ideas and set aside credentials, because in our world, you could have all the credentials in the world and still be wrong, and somebody with no credentials could totally usurp that. That's how it operates on our world. And that's not the world that he was expecting when he walked in. Now, I really want to get to this video. Because I said I was going to be talking about it. So I'm going to get to this video. I'm probably going to play it a little bit faster because it's a 10-minute video, came from Dave Rubin. And I'm going to try to, we'll see how much we actually play of it because I'm at 1 hour and 50 minutes. And I appreciate everybody hanging in with me. That's been really great because obviously I do need the hours, and I don't want to just podcast and nobody watch. So I appreciate you guys. The weekends, I promise you, are going to be the only ones where I'm this loose with my time. And we're only going to do it for a couple of weekends so that I can get to that 30 hours in 30 days. Really quickly here, that Liberty lady asked me, "Did you and Liberty Son have fun at Minecraft thing that you went to? Supposedly, Deegan is starting some kind of Minecraft project. Not sure if your son is old enough." That's good information. Yes, we did. So last night, I took my son. He loves Minecraft, loves it. He'll wake up and he'll be like, "Daddy, did you know in Minecraft, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, "Son, don't forget to get dressed while you're talking about Minecraft." He'll come downstairs and he's like eating his breakfast. He's like, the Enderman, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like going on and on. Like, I would say, my son is knowledgeable. I wouldn't consider him an expert at Minecraft, but he's very knowledgeable about it. And at this rate, he is working toward being an intellectual. An expert in Minecraft. So he might have to start a podcast in the future to talk about Minecraft and his expertise. Just saying. Let's see here. All right, so let's move on here to this video. And this is what I really wanted to get into, but I think I needed to lay the groundwork for it. And I think I've sufficiently done it, maybe even overdone it. So let's play this video here real quick.
Our friend Konstantin Kisin from the Trigonometry podcast, he put up on Substack an article about something that's been kind of brewing online. And I'm just going to read you one line of it, and I want your take. Podcastistan is a place where people scold the mainstream media for failing to live up to their standards while having none of their own. And this was to the backdrop of a Douglas Murray, Dave Smith debate, largely about Israel on Rogan's podcast. And I've been thinking a lot about this because people, putting aside even the specifics of the debate, and you guys are welcome to talk about whatever you want, obviously, as we watch mainstream collapse and the gatekeeping that you were talking about earlier, James, and most people watching this, I think, agree that gatekeeping has been terrible, especially COVID, I think, blew apart so many doors for people that now they're questioning everything. And you've got people thinking that Winston Churchill was the bad guy in World War II and somehow Hitler was good. And just like the litany of things that we've upended, we are finding ourselves in a weird place where everyone's just going off to their corner to find truth. I do the best I can on this show to tell people what I think. I'm going to have some blind spots and make mistakes every now and again. But as we whirl further into Podcastistan, as Konstantin is talking about, is this, like, in some sense, the most dangerous thing that a modern society can be in, where we're just going to all define truth for ourselves? And in some ways, we have to blame the previous gatekeepers because they did not do a good enough job gatekeeping correctly. If I'm framing this correctly, James, feel free to clean that up if you don't agree with the premise.
Okay. So he's basically like, he's asking, we're gonna hear what James has to say. But he's like, hey, it's the question is basically, is there too much access to information and too much availability for everybody to talk about this information? Is that backfiring? Is it becoming a problem? Right? Like, is it something that sounded good, kind of like Konstantin said, the democratization of information? Is that becoming a bad thing, or is that a good thing? Now, I'm going to fall on the side of it's a good thing, and I'll precede James's answer by pointing out to you again, this is not the first time in history that we've had this. Back in Jesus's day, and again, I'm not comparing anybody to Jesus, just this situation. Jesus went to bat against the Pharisees and the Sadducees on behalf of the people, right? They held tightly on the information. They were the ones that determined, what was right, what was wrong, the information that you should know, what you should get to hear. They got to decide that. And Jesus basically was the pushback. So he basically was the podcaster of the day. Like if we're just stepping away from the spiritual sense, he was basically the podcaster of the day. And then you go forward, and we had that happen again with the Gutenberg press. When the Gutenberg press was created, that allowed information to really flourish in a way that it had never done before. Because at the time, writing manuscripts, making copies, you had to do it by hand, and it was labor intensive. It took a lot of time. You couldn't always afford it, right? Because you had to pay somebody to do that work. So a lot of the masses didn't have access to the information like they did after the press. And that allowed the Catholic Church, for one, to have a stranglehold on information. And the Catholic Church was dismayed. And you go back and you could look in history and see where they really, that's what helped bring the rise of Protestantism, is partially due to the press, because a lot more people were able to become literate. They were able to read things. They could look at documents and they could say, no, that's not true, or I disagree with how your framing of this. I disagree with your understanding of this. Like that was the democratization of information of the day. Jesus was before that. Today, I'm arguing and saying the internet, largely the internet, has allowed that to happen yet again. And we're seeing all the different areas. So now I can go and look up court cases where once upon a time I would have to go and find them on paper somewhere, right? Once upon a time, that's how you had to do it. You had to go read the actual paper that was printed somewhere. Now I can find a document of it. Like talking about the Abrego Garcia, I read all of his court, like some 30 documents online. I didn't go to a library. I didn't go to a courthouse. I didn't request any information from afar, like, the old school way, like, hey, please send this document to me. I was able just to go online and find it and read it myself. And then I've been arguing online with people and saying, I think that you're reading the court case wrong, right? Like, I think you're reading the ruling incorrectly. And I've done that elsewhere, right? So we are in a different stage. Now we can also podcast and talk about it because it's becoming cheaper and cheaper and cheaper for people to do it. So I think we're in a shakeup yet again. And like in past times, like in the Gutenberg press, like with Jesus's day, the authorities of the day don't like it.
No, you're not wrong. So the social constructivism I talked about earlier is relevant, but also what you're witnessing is postmodernism. What he's actually putting his finger on is called the postmodern condition. So now we have, I guess, the alt media, which largely codes right. Podcastistan is a great name for it because.
Okay, so he's correct. It does largely lean right. However, let's not forget there is a large contingent of left wingers out there as well. They don't get as much talking, much publicity as they once did, if you will. But like you might like go look it up. You can find the bread tubers. They were kind of like the early adopters of this as a platform, right? To talk about culture and politics. So that existed before where we are now. It just exploded because again, it became easier and cheaper, right? There are different resources. Once upon a time, you had to spend more money to buy the equipment. Once upon a time, there were fewer resources to be able to stream. Now, like every Tom, Dick, and DL, they can have a streaming service on Rumble and X and YouTube and Facebook, just like I'm doing right now. And I'm doing that all for a very, very low cost. Like you could actually do all of those for free and then just purchase your equipment and you can purchase. So again, like I said, whereas once upon a time, having a public voice like this might cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. Now you could probably do it for a couple of hundred. So let's listen to the rest of his answer.
If you don't pay your right dues to it, then they'll kick you out. That it has gone postmodern. This is the postmodern condition, and everything that went along with postmodernism on the left that sucked is going to come here that also sucks. But the social constructivist viewpoint, which, by the way, critical constructivism is the formal academic name for what we call woke. The social constructivist viewpoint is that there's a they out there, the critical constructivist, because you got to be critical theory of it. There's a they out there who have gatekept the institutions so that their knowledges are considered valid and nobody else's outside knowledges are considered valid. Therefore, outsider knowledge that challenges the existing establishment is considered more valid. And so that's actually also what he's touching on. So this is why these people qualify under a brand name like woke right, because most of them identify on the right. They push so-called right-wing values, and they've adopted a left-wing epistemology. I said that in long form with Winston on his podcast when we were at ARC together and talked about the same issue. So they value outsider knowledge that supports a prevailing anti-establishment narrative, aka a critical theory. And so this is what we're actually seeing and of course Constantine has I envious here a way with words that is sometimes just positively magical, and he's done it extremely well there. I'm a little frustrated with my friend Douglas from that debate because the word that didn't come up from the journalist that should have come up, that needed to come up, that I'm dying for it to have come up, is due diligence. It's not about expertise in that particular discussion they had. It is about whether or not due diligence has been done before reporting is being brought to the surface. And Douglas's point was, I've done due diligence before I wrote my book, and you haven't done due diligence for the amount you talk about this. And due diligence is a concept that hasn't fallen out of view. Like you looked up the Alan Shepard stuff. That was doing some due diligence on this. You vet all of the clips that you show. That's doing due diligence before you put together your show. That's actually a high standard of journalistic integrity. It's not present in Podcastistan. And as Constantine kind of has poked that bear and revealed, they don't like having that mirror held up to their face, but that's because they're postmodern and don't have anything else.
Okay. So that was an awful lot of academic speak. So the first point that I want to make is that he isn't talking to everyday average people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have used half of that language. And I'm not saying that people are dumb or that he's super smart. I'm sure he's smart, right? I'm not saying that I don't understand what he's talking about. We all can go and look up those terms and spend 10, 15 minutes reading about them, come back and watch it. And then we can understand and say, oh, okay, I get what he's trying to say. What it boils down to, what he's basically trying to say is the right now is basically the left, what the left once was. And in some ways that is correct. And I've argued similarly. I've said, hey, look, the right is now trying to cancel people, whereas once upon a time it was the left cancel people. And you can argue about who started it, and you can argue about at what time in history one group was doing, one side was doing it more than the other. Back in the 90s, it was canceling people was very popular in evangelical circles. Like if you rose to prominence as a singer or anybody in the evangelical community, and then you had even the slightest slip up, people were ready to cancel you, and they would do everything in their power. They had less power at the time because we didn't have the internet and the ability to spread the ideas so quickly and so easily. All right. But you still had this. So you had the right. They were canceling people early on. But I think if you look over time, you will find that the left has done it for a longer amount of time, over time, and they've been better at it. And now we're seeing that the right is doing it as well. I've criticized people on the right. For instance, the Home Depot lady that I talked about in one of my past episodes, where she got canceled for saying something dumb on the internet. She was like, hey, something like, maybe too bad the shooter missed, when she was talking about Donald Trump's attempted assassination. It was a dumb comment. I wouldn't have, I objected to the idea of people hunting her down and going embarrassing her at her work and tagging Home Depot and getting her fired. But that's exactly the kind of behavior that we once saw on the left. We now see it on the right. So he is making a valid point here. But the more important thing that I want you to take away is that he's not talking to you. He's not talking to Podcastistan either. He is talking to the intelligentsia. That is why he's using words like postmodern and the other terms that he's using. He's using them on purpose, right? Because he is talking to a specific crowd, and it isn't you, right? They're not interested in working together. That is a problem. Now, I would argue the people in Podcastistan are, generally speaking, they are working. They would like to work together with people. Why? Because we bring on experts. Joe Rogan brought on Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray didn't have to fight. And there have been some interesting things. Like some people on Douglas Murray's side have pointed out, and they're like, oh, Dave got to go on there solo. But when Douglas Murray come on, Dave had to come on as a counterbalance. That's actually not true. Douglas Murray has been on there like 2 or 3 times by himself, right? So he has been on there to talk about whatever Joe Rogan was interested in. But Joe Rogan has brought him on. He has brought other experts on. Does he give them fair and equal time on a particular issue, hot button or not? No, not necessarily. But again, that's not why he's doing it. we have a different culture here in Podcastistan. And the intelligentsia do not seem to be interested in it. They seem to be interested in more like conquering it and imposing their culture. Because as you can see, all they keep talking about is how are people presented, and challenged. Let's continue listening.
So, Winston, I know that this issue is near and dear to you, and we talked about it on your podcast a couple of weeks ago as well. Do you think part of the problem here is that it's something that I reference all the time that Jordan Peterson brought up years ago, that the left never knows when to gatekeep the left, right? They never know when they've gone too far. And now we're seeing a version of that on the right for the reasons that James just put out there. The gatekeepers were so bad, again, I think particularly during COVID. I think had COVID not gone so crazy, a lot of this doesn't happen. But now everyone's willing to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, I would say I'm so happy that the light.
Oops, I didn't mean to stop that. I meant to pause it.
Our friend Constantine Kissing from the
Let's go back. Where are we? Right there.
The likes of both of you.
Okay, so let's pause this for a second because I wanted to address something. Dave says, if COVID hadn't happened, this wouldn't have happened. Maybe. I think because again, Podcastistan is not all about COVID. It's about many things. And it has been growing long before COVID. This is not a new thing. And I feel like there's an interesting critique from Thomas Sowell. He talks about how liberals, when they talk about race relations in this country, they always seem to start in the 1960s, and they act as if nothing ever happened before the 1960s other than slavery. So it's like if they talk about something that happened before the 1960s, it's like slavery or, some like Jim Crow laws or whatever, right? But they're never talking about anything that positively happened, right? Because like nothing positive happened before the 1960s. Because the 1960s marked where there was a lot of legislation going toward race relations. So Sowell's criticism of them is that like, hey, history didn't start in the 1960s. It actually started a long time before that. And if you want to understand how the 60s played out, you got to understand the 50s and you got to understand the 40s and so on and so forth, right? Like, and there's like, if you go back far enough, then maybe it's too far. Like you're not going to understand the 1960s by going on and saying, okay, what happened in BC 25, right? Or whatever. Like you can't go back before Christ and say, well, that event led to the 1960s. No, there's a certain point where you're going back too far. Clearly in this country, we can go back towards slavery. So we can go back basically to the beginning of this country. And a lot of people don't do that. I think that's what's happening here with this whole Podcastistan. They're like, oh, October 7th, 2023. And they say that. They're like, Dave decided to start talking about, no, he didn't decide to start talking about Israel. He didn't just decide to start talking about foreign policy. He has been talking about it, right? And the same thing with COVID. COVID did not, like podcasts were already moving forward. There was already progression. There was already a trend starting before that, before COVID. COVID may have amplified it. I think at best it's accurate to say that COVID made it happen quicker. That what we're seeing is the expediting because of COVID. Not that it's here because of COVID. And that distinction is a massive one that needs to be understood.
You gentlemen, as well as Constantine, as well as Douglas Murray, are being very quick to call out when the right are going too far. They're making no hesitation, which is not something that we can say about the left and how the woke cult took over the Democrat Party and much else. So I don't think that the behavior on this side of the fence is quite comparable.
Mhm.
But I'm not sure that this is saying anything new, but perhaps rephrasing what Constantine is observing, which is that I think why I started watching shows like yours, Dave, and others is because I lost faith in the mainstream media because I knew for a fact that they were at best only showing half of the story
Mhm.
and at worst intentionally manipulating what was really going on. Who could forget the famous Chiron mainly peaceful protests?
Yeah.
And what it seems to have happened.
Okay. I agree with him. And I think this was a major component in catapulting podcasts to where they are. People were tired of it, but we were tired of it for a long time, even before COVID, right? Even during COVID, right? So for instance, and I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, but I will tell you about it. I had a let's see here. I mean, I'm going to pull it up and just kind of read just kind of a snippet to you if I can. Okay, perfect. So let me see if I can't. Let's see here. I'm pulling up my website, libertydad.com, and what I'm doing is I'm going down to some of my earliest episodes. So one of my earliest episodes, which was, I think it was the 7th episode, was it? Yes, episode number 7, February of 2020. So I started podcasting at the beginning of 2020, before COVID. So we didn't have a COVID thing going on in January and February. There were some rumblings that there might be something going on, but there was no widespread response by the public. So I started podcasting before COVID because I saw it as like, hey, this is a way for me to present libertarian ideas. One of the episodes that I made, episode number 7, was Jeers to Cheers. And this was how I described it. I said, this week I discuss the recent comments made on Don Lemon's show by Rick Wilson, who mocks Trump voters. Mr. Wilson's comments are common and mistaken. I take a historical tour of varying comments and headlines from known sources showing the elitist attitude is not new or occasional. Rather, it's systemic. I then tie in how this played a large role in getting Donald Trump elected. So in that episode I put out on February 3rd, 2020, I went through and I dug up headline after headline over like the last prior 10 years where the more liberal mainstream media was beating up, was bullying conservatives. And like there were headlines along the lines of like liberals have higher IQs than conservatives. If you're a conservative, you might be racist. I even pointed to an Atlantic article that said, "Dear fellow liberals," is basically, I'm paraphrasing, "Dear fellow liberals, we need to stop using racism to beat up on conservatives because it's not always true and it's not a good idea." Like even some people on the left were identifying and saying, this is a bad thing. People were tired of it. They wanted different outlet. That's why Fox News became popular, because it gave them a different outlet when they started getting beat up on and bullied. Podcasts, similarly, were the same thing, but it came about, and again, and as I would argue, it was catapulted because of COVID, but it was already in progress, right? Foreign policy didn't start on October 7th. Podcast didn't start during COVID. So the intellectuals are getting their facts wrong because they're looking at maybe monumental events and saying, oh, this must be the start. No, there was already a trend. These events just simply might have made things more popular and then accelerated the pace. That's it. Let's continue listening. Where's my mouse?
Is a sort of what might or what is happening is the sort of an equally bad opposite, which is that the Podcastistan, as Konstantin calls it, is now only showing half the story. And a good example of this, and I would say on a personal level, Joe Rogan is a very lovely man. It's certainly in my interactions with him, but it is the case that he's had on his show a lot of pro or rather anti-Israel voices, a lot of anti-Ukraine voices, which is not itself a problem. But the problem is they're not commensurate with the opposite side being heard at all. So you're getting...
Okay. He's kind of correct. And it is a response to the opposite that we had. However, in Podcastistan, we don't advertise like fair and balanced. That's not how we do it. We talk about what we're interested in, the side that we're interested in, and then we occasionally have debates about it with people that disagree. And let me show up a video. I'm sorry, an image here real quick. Let's see. Yes, here's a good image. So this is from, I don't know, Wocal Distance. I don't know who that is, but they said what Douglas Murray was saying is that Daryl Cooper, Ian Carroll, etc., are happy to wield a degree of influence in public historical discourse that is typically reserved for experts, but refuse to be held to the intellectual standards we hold experts to. So here's how I responded. I said, this is a fundamental misunderstanding of podcast and the internet. Cooper and Carroll can be held accountable through long-form podcast, debates, and response videos, the same mechanism that grants popularity provides for, quote, peer review. I then went on to say, why don't intellectuals grasp this? This was Douglas's chance to, quote, crush Dave, yet he spent a third of it complaining about credentials. Then again, maybe selling his book was the priority. That's a little jab. We're not going to get into that. That was just a jab on my part. But my point being is that all the things that they're claiming don't happen in Podcastistan actually do. They happen differently. We do long form podcast. And they made this point about Daryl Cooper. They said Daryl Cooper's not trying to have debates with historians. He's trying to have long form conversations. That's why he would go on the Joe Rogan show to have a long form conversation. And if you can get him on your show, you can have a long form conversation and say, what about this? Let's explore this idea more. Why would you say that? Okay, make this make sense. All that good stuff. And that's not unfamiliar to libertarians, because a lot of libertarians will point out and say that people will eschew our ideas and they'll say those are terrible ideas. And we'll say, and they'll want to maybe debate the idea, or they'll want to dismiss the idea. And we'll say, well, we need to have a longer conversation because, for starters, you're presenting our ideas as if we don't want rules and regulation in place, when in reality, what we actually want is a different entity to manage it. We don't believe the government has been very good at it. We think that in many or most cases, or all cases for my anarchist friends out there, we believe that, what happened here? Did I just... I think I'm still live. I'm not sure. I had to refresh. So if somebody's in the chat, let me know. If things aren't working, I'll try to keep an eye on it. But that was kind of weird. Like my browser just refreshed. Anyway, what was I saying? I got distracted quite heavily there. So that was his opportunity to push back against Dave. That was his opportunity to hold Dave accountable. And if he didn't do it, that's a Douglas problem, not a Podcastistan problem. That was a Douglas problem for not recognizing the world for which he walked into. So, okay, so you see me. Okay, good. So we are still streaming. Just whatever happened, I don't know what happened. Apologies, folks. Technology goes like that. If I wanted to be conspiratorial, well, then I might say somebody is after me. They don't want me to speak. But that's not really the case. It's a technology issue. All right, so let's go back to this video. So point being, like they're not being forthright because I don't think they understand. And I'm trying, hopefully all these points lead to demonstrating this. So let's go back and listen to what he was saying.
One side. And I would even say, Douglas Murray goes onto the show. Dave Smith was on the week before. When Douglas goes on, we need to invite Dave Smith on to just make sure everything you say is, checked. And so,
okay, so see right there, he's like, they're making a claim. So in the process of saying these guys don't want to be held accountable, who is holding this man accountable for making a claim that isn't true, that I just showed you to the contrary? Joe Rogan did not bring on Dave by himself and then bring on Douglas Smith and then say, oh, we need to have a counterpoint. He literally, in his own words, said, I think you're brilliant. I think you're brilliant. I think you'll agree with some things that he says, and you'll agree with some things that he says. You'll both disagree. I want to have this conversation. I want to hear it. He told them the purpose of why they were both on there. And yet, the argument from the intellectuals is, well, he brought him on to counter because God forbid we bring somebody on that has a different perspective. That's not true. They're doing exactly what they're criticizing Podcastistan for doing, with no accountability. And they're not talking to regular, everyday, average people. So they're not even talking to me and you to try to get, because if they were, they wouldn't be talking about postmodernism and what did he say, the woke right, and some of the other terms that are not standard terminology when we have these conversations. Those are academic terms or intellectual terms that are used in particular intellectual discourse. It's not that we don't know what they mean. They're just not common in the podcast world. You might bring them up occasionally, but then you bring them up to use a point, then you break them down and you move on. And either you speak more casually or you just make sure that you reiterate and keep your whole conversation at a level so that people that are casually listening will understand and make sense of. But that's not what's happening because they're not interested.
There's his due diligence there, but so the due diligence maybe is only being applied to one side of things. Now, he might come back and say, well, it's not his responsibility to show all sides. It's his show. He can do whatever he wants. And he's actually right. He can do whatever he wants. But it is the case that his show is, I think, the biggest in the world still. It has been at points. And if it's not, it's up in the top 5. He's got enormous influence. And so if he's not going to bring on voices to challenge people like Daryl Cooper, who are saying, Churchill was the chief villain in World War II. In fact, when Daryl Cooper went on Joe's show, he said, you've got to take Mein Kampf with a pinch of salt, for which he got no pushback. And I'm sorry, that for me was the moment where I was like, actually, this has gone too far. So yeah, I think that the duty is on us now to speak up about it.
I would just add or go ahead, James, and then I'll.
Yeah, can I do the boil down trick you did? So I'll take all this wonderful brilliance of Winston that he just gave us, but it's my dog crap analogy with the gatekeeping, right? So we know not to eat dog crap, but we also know that ask Maha, it's pretty wild over there. Maha understands Make America Healthy Again, if you don't know what I'm referring to, understands that, the gatekeepers at the FDA have not been doing their job right? They're letting all kinds of fun chemicals. I think Chick-fil-A has aluminum and sugar or something in the breading. I don't know, something crazy. All these different things have been allowed, food additives and so on. So the question is, what do you do with this, right? Is it, hey, they've been lying to us about what's in our food, so let's eat dog crap because anything goes? Or is it, maybe we need a more responsible regulatory agency that's making sure that all this crap isn't coming through? And so it's very much reminiscent of that. And what Podcastistan represents is, we've been betrayed by our institutions for not doing their proper role. And therefore, let's just throw caution to the wind is kind of what Konstantin's saying, when it should be, in fact, what we need is to reassert journalistic integrity and rigor to the greatest degree possible.
Gentlemen, I guess our work is cut out for us.
All right. What's really funny about James's argument, he calls it postmodernism, basically the right is adopting the behavior of the left. But if you go back in history and you look at say Rush Limbaugh and you look at other people, talking heads, it has long been the argument from the left that, hey, we need equal time. That is an argument from the left. That is not an argument from the right. And it's never been an argument from the right. The right is just look, compete in the arena of ideas. If you can be better than Rush Limbaugh, then grab a microphone and start talking. And they couldn't because they were not interesting. They were not able to deliver in a way that the masses were interested in. So they got mad. And then they kept calling for boycotts, and they would call for equal time. And if you go back, you will find that there was legislation that was proposed that would force everybody to have equal time for ideas. And the right rightfully pushed back on it. Now you see a segment of the right doing the same thing. So James Lindsay can come at us and talk about postmodernism, and he can use really cool academic words that many people may not be familiar with. But at the end of the day, if we're going to boil things down, many people on the right don't like how the conversation is going, and they're starting to drift into what the left used to do, which is start calling for standards, start calling, which I'm willing to bet. And I'm going to keep this episode in mind because I will put it out there. I'm willing to bet that probably within the next year, we will see some legislation from the right regarding podcast. Now, why do I say that? A couple of reasons. One, they're making a big stink of this. Like again, for the first few days, all I saw was people from Murray's side, people from Smith's side going back and forth over and over and over, right? And usually the criticisms of Dave were the same. Dave didn't capitulate on the expertise, right? He didn't capitulate there. Daryl said that Winston Churchill is the chief villain, and he said something about Mein Kampf. Like, that's pretty much the entirety of their arguments. It's not a whole lot. Like, if you want to convince me that these guys are so bad in their knowledge and so bad in their ability to put it all together, you're not doing a good job of it. This is why Air America failed many, many years ago, like a decade ago or so, maybe even a little bit longer, right? That's why it failed, because you're trying to ride on credentialism and ride on, I will tell you what is the right message. And the people that can argue against me are not you. We know that because in that clip, they're not talking to us. It's very clear they're not talking to us. Now, toward the end, James does kind of say, oh, it's my poop analogy. And so now he gets into a more podcast language, if you will, right? But he begins outside of the podcast language in a more academic language. And that's fine. There's a time and place for all that. And I have no issue with it. But I'm just saying, like, when you put this all together, what I'm really seeing is a trend. I'm seeing a trend on the right. They don't like where the conversation's going. They don't like what people are saying. Maybe we should question that. They don't like losing the authority that they have. In the same way that the Catholic Church didn't like losing its authority after the Gutenberg press, in the same way that the Pharisees and the Sadducees didn't like losing their power when Jesus came around and started pushing back and was able to outwit them. And he did repeatedly. So what are we going to start seeing? I think we're already starting to see, like, they're trashing Dave left and right. I think they're circling the wagons, and I think they're going to be looking for ways to put a stop to podcast or to limit them. They may not stop them. That may be unfair, but don't be surprised if you see some legislation that's applied. The other reason, and a lot of people, and I've been trying to tell people this, they were like, oh, the mainstream media is dying. Joe Rogan has a way bigger audience. And so then we turn around and we see, oh, well, we need this legislation, various legislation for what people say in the media. And I'm like, well, like right now they're talking about what you can and cannot say regarding Israel, right? The International Holocaust Remembrance Museum, that what they've determined to be anti-Semitism has been put into law all over the place, right? In America, right? And it's not terribly impactful just yet to Americans, but I suspect it will be. And I suspect that we're going to start seeing bit by bit some legislation that comes out and says, if you're on a podcast, you can't or cannot do this, or you have to do this. One good example, people were cheering on the right when RFK came out and said, we should stop pharmaceutical advertisements on TV. Now, I want you to think about something. If mainstream media is dying and people are gravitating toward podcast, and they put a rule that, and the bills that I've seen have only applied to mainstream media, if they put out a rule, they put out legislation that says pharmaceuticals cannot advertise on television, and everybody's moving to podcast, where would the smart pharmaceuticals go next to be able to promote their products? Well, they're going to go to podcast, and some podcasters will take the money. They'll say, yeah, why not? Right? And then what's going to happen? That legislation, if it gets passed, or if it gets put into, regulation gets put into place, it will become applicable to podcast. And who will be cheering it on? People on the right. Some of them will, particularly those who are surrounding themselves with the intelligentsia, who are in that circle, who respect that circle more than they do the podcast world. So be ye warned, podcasters. I think it's coming, because I think that all of this, you can argue about the merits of Dave's arguments versus Doug's, and whether or not they were a better debater, whether or not they had a better position on Israel, whatever. You can have all those arguments, and that's fine. It's not an area that I'm going to get into. But I think that it was a demonstration of what we can expect to see based on the results of it, because it wasn't one of the debates where Dave ended it and basically everybody heralded Dave as being so great, like which usually happens in his past debates. It actually got both sides fired up and both sides putting stuff out. And now we're having conversations about, hey, we need to figure out how we impose these journalistic standards. That's what they're doing. And I've pointed out in the past that some of our citizen journalists, they need to be reined in, not by the elites, but by us. Because I pointed out, who was it? Sarah Fields. I just criticized her yesterday, for doing that very thing. 3 stories that I can name off the top of my head that went viral on social media within the last, I think, 6 months, she has gotten wrong. She has gotten information wrong. And I said, we need to put a stop to that. We need to say, look, if you're going to get it wrong that frequently, you need to go back to the table and figure out what you're doing, because you're getting it way too wrong. And people like her are going to be the reason why people like Lindsay and Dave Rubin will in the end support limiting speech or imposing some sort of regulation or rules that have to formally be followed. So be warned, folks, because I think it's coming. All right. Last time for checking into the comments here. Let's see. By the way, I want to say Jazz Ann on Facebook, thank you for joining. You said judging. I don't really know what you mean by that, but if you're judging me, go right ahead. And I will take the judgment and I will consider it. Depending on how you deliver it. If you just come out, and not you, but anybody, if you come out and you're just like, oh, you're a stupid idiot, blah, 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 I'll probably ignore you. But if you come out and say, man, I think you got something wrong, here's my take on it, blah, 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 I'll consider it, because that is how it actually works in Podcastistan. Let's see here. And let's see. I hope Mark K would push back. His livelihood is his podcast. I agree. And I hope I can make this part of my livelihood, one of my revenue streams. And I hope, you expect that I push back. And if I say something in error, correct me, attack my argument, hold me accountable, and I will do better. Right. And I will do my best to cite all of my sources and to not cite just the clips or the snippets that fit my narrative, but take an objective view on the whole. So with that, I am going to head on out, folks. Thank you for joining me. 2.5 hours. This is going toward me getting that 30 hours in 30 days. I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you are there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment. You can also become part of the community by heading over to libertydad.locals.com. Remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.